Hello, traveler. Before you drift off to sleep tonight, let me take you somewhere far away in time. Imagine the soft ringing of a church bell across a quiet valley, the smell of wood smoke rising from a village hearth, the slow rhythm of footsteps on cobblestone paths. Have you ever wondered what life felt like in medieval Europe? Not in the battles or the legends, but in the calm, ordinary moments. Tonight, together, we will wander through those still places, where time moved slower, and where each season shaped the rhythm of life. So settle in, close your eyes, and let's step gently into the Middle Ages, not as knights or kings, but as quiet observers, listening to history's softest whispers. Listen for a moment before the story begins. Hear the distant bell that marks the hour, not sharply, but with a round, patient tone that drifts across the low hills and over the thatched roofs of a small village. It is early, and the mist is still heavy enough to bead on wolf sleeves and the edges of barley leaves. The bell is not a command. It is a reminder. Time moves here in long, even strokes. The people move with it. In a place like this, the day begins before the sun is fully decided. A cockerel calls from a rough perch. A dog shakes itself awake in dust that has not yet warmed. Those wooden, swollen a little from last night's dew, push outward on leather hinges. Smoke slips up from holes in thatch as a first fire takes. A woman tips yesterday's embers into new tinder, coaxes flame with a patient breath, sets a pot to the side so the water can remember how to boil. Bread from last night, still firm and brown, turns soft again beside the warmth. Someone mends a strap with a bone needle. Someone else pulls on boots still damp from yesterday's fieldwork and does not complain. There is much to do, and none of it is rushed. The village itself is small enough to walk from one edge to the other in the length of a psalm. Houses crouch close together as if listening, a scatter of wattle and daub walls, pale and smoothed, shouldering under roofs of straw and reed. Between them are thin paths where hens imagine themselves important and children play a game that has been played so long it has no inventor. Beyond the houses, gardens fenced with sticks where cabbages tuck their heads, leeks stand like thin monks, peas take a polite climb. Farther out, the open fields, banded in strips and ploughed, some stubbled, some green and resting, divided not by walls, but by understanding. Your family has this strip and the next. Your neighbor has those too. The Lord has his. The church, its own. The land is not measured by ownership alone, but by labor, by whose hands will be here when the time is right. If you walk to the fields just now, you would find the plough team already working where the ground allows it. 2 oxen pull. A man steadies the coulter with a practiced hand. Another steps behind with a fork to lift what clogs. The soil opens obediently, then closes again after the seed, like a book someone knows too well to hurt. At the edges, hedgerows cowlick the lanes. Sparrows explode out of them and settle again. A boy watches the oxen's slow hips and thinks without words that the world is built on such swaying patience. Not everyone is in the fields. Some days the rhythm is different. At the watermill on the stream, the wheel turns steadily and speaks the village's oldest syllable. Women arrive with sacks of grain against their hips, trade greetings, share a quiet joke, pass the time with news gentle enough to be said twice. The miller pause, listens, adjusts, tests the flour between his fingers for fineness. It is not a science of numbers. It is a science of feel. His hands know when to stop. He shortens the measure for those who can't afford more. He lengthens it a little for the widow. No one writes this down, but everyone remembers in the smithy. A different language. Iron, fire, water. The smith draws a bar from the coals like a line of sunrise and speaks to it with the hammer. Steady, steady. Turn, steady. Sparks leap, brief as midges. A child hovers at the door, pretending not to be afraid of the noise. The smith does not notice, and of course he does. He takes a moment to quench the iron with a hiss that makes the boy's eyes widen, and without looking up he says, bellows, and the child obeys. The air behind the forge breathes, the fire fattens, and the smith's world returns to its slow circle. All of this unspools across a week that is more pattern than plan. The church marks its measures, the bell for prime, for terce, for sext, for none. The sound is less an order than a reassurance. Time is being tended. On the 7th day, the village dresses itself in better wool, cleaner linen. Feet step more slowly. Voices lower. Smoke climbs from incense and cedar. Words in Latin travel through people who do not know their grammar, but know their weight. Children are held close. Elders stand at the aisle, steadying themselves on benches with hands veined like roots. Afterward, outside, the talk is warmer, the bread sweeter, The afternoon calm. Seasons make the larger music. In spring, everything is wet and willing. Plows bite. Lambs arrive with a sound that is always slightly surprised at itself. The river forgets winter and moves as if there had never been ice. People look happier even when they are tired from bending. A girl cuts willow to weave a basket and does not think herself an artist. Nevertheless, the basket will be beautiful. Summer widens. Barley combs itself in the wind. The air smells of sheep, of new cut hay, of something green losing its greenness in a way that will feed animals later. Songs grow lighter in the mouth. Work stretches longer because the light allows it. A boy falls asleep in the middle of a chore and is forgiven because he is growing as fast as beans on a good trellis. There is a day at midsummer when the village lights a wheel, an old fire rolled down a slope in a controlled bravery, and even the careful people laugh. Fire is not only danger, it is also companionship. Autumn narrows gently. Harvest is a pageant of effort, scythes sweeping, stooks standing in neat ranks, carts wobbling with their happiness, the air full of chaff that sticks to damp skin and then falls away. The work is large and close. It begins, it continues, it finishes. The village thanks elaborately, shyly, with a procession and a loaf shaped like the thing it is made from, and then sets to storing. Salted meat, hanging in the rafters, apples darkening towards sweetness on a shelf, sawdust on a floor that is finally clean enough to lie on and sigh. The year tilts. Geese complain. Winter asks for quiet. Doors close earlier. Candles are lit with thrift. The hearth reclaims the center. Someone tells a story he was told by someone who is told. The story is not a lesson. It is a blanket. Outside, the ground is not idle. It is busy with sleep. There is work. Yes, mending, spinning, scraping. The odd necessary journey with a body wrapped to its eyes, but there is also permission to rest. The bell still speaks across the white mornings. When it does, it sounds nearer. You could live an entire life in a place like this and never meet a king, and you would not have missed him. You would have met the reeve who balances chores and small disputes with a fair eye, the priest with his Latin and his stories, the midwife with her hands wise from everything that can go right and everything that can go wrong, the shepherd whose dogs listen better than most people and whose jokes arrive 3 steps late and are better for it. You would have learned to read the sky honestly, the kind of clouds that mean rain for oats but not for wheat, the thin frost that harms blossoms, the more serious hoarfrost that kindles worry, the exact tone of the river when it is pushing toward flood, the way rooks sit when they expect a wind from the north. These, too, are books that can be read without ink. The calendar in the village belongs to saints and sewing. Candlemas brings beeswax if you can afford it and tallow if you cannot. Lent turns the table plain. Easter loosens the voice alleluia until even the cautious smile. Rogation days see a procession along the field's edges, a blessing that is less magic than mindfulness. Here is the boundary. Here is the stream. Here is where we laid our dead and planted geesefoot for the living. In summer, there is a saint's day that means nothing to the rest of the world and everything to this parish, and there is dancing with a good sort of clumsiness. Michaelmas arrives with geese, shepherd accounts, and the first talk of hiring for the year to come. All Souls brings candles and names. Advent pulls the world inward, and then the Christmas lets the music out again, like a bird released from a careful hand on market days. The village is a different creature. The green fills with stalls that are not really stalls, boards across barrels, cloths on rope, cheeses in a brave row, eggs counted with reverence. A man with nothing but a sack of salt becomes important. A woman with dyed thread becomes an artist for an hour. There are disputes that are not disputes. My onions against your pot, your iron nail against my patience. People accept that they are seen, which is not always comfortable, and then go home with news. They will relay 2 or 3 times without noticing where it changed shape. The road out of the village is not long, but it is everything if the Lord rides through. The village does not stop what it is doing. It adjusts. Bread is brought. Someone bows deeply enough to reassure. The reeve keeps accounts in his head and on a stick, scores cut cleanly, tallies honest as wood. The manorial court sits sometimes under a tree, sometimes in a hall that smells of rushes and damp wool. A boundary is argued, a pig's mischief accounted for, a promise renewed that offence will be mended before the winter. Justice here is slow and public, and because of that it tends to be remembered. Children learn without knowing they are learning. They carry water without spilling, then with spilling and laughter, then without spilling again. They watch hands and imitate. A girl's first loaf is a brick and then not a brick. A boy's first knot slips and then holds. A grandmother hums while carding wool, and the hum remains after she sleeps. The dog decides which child needs shepherding and is right. The year turns again. At night, when work has loosened its grip and the house has found its seats, light is a small lake candle, rushlight. The heart of the fire glowing like a beast that is good when fed and sulky when neglected. Someone brings out a psaltery with two strings and a voice to match. Someone else tells a riddle that everyone knows and still enjoys. There is cider that tastes like the autumn that made it. There is ale that tastes like the field that became it. If the weather is kind, people sit on benches outside and notice the stars without needing to name them. Orion is a huntsman, whether or not you learned his stories, and the Pleiades are still a little cloud no matter what you call them. Across the village, dogs answer each other in a language old as bread. Sleep arrives the way it should because the body is used well, because the mind is not starved of pattern, because tomorrow will be similar, and that is not a sadness. Somewhere a child wakes and is soothed. Somewhere a woman sits quietly and thinks her private thoughts. Somewhere a man turns in his blanket and does not realize he has quoted a line from a psalm that he does not know he knows. The fire settles. The bell, if it speaks at night, is heard in dreams as if the world itself were breathing. Toward the end of the year, when frost bits out every nail head on every door, the village does something generous. It keeps a memory for the future. Grain is set aside, not much, but enough to matter. A hedge is repaired even though it could last another month. A gutter is cleared though it will simply need clearing again. A baby is carried from one house to another so that hands can weigh possibility. A lamb is spared. A story is told properly, without hurrying, so that the child who hears it understands not only what is said but how to say it next time. This is the village's wisdom. When the world is thin, you thicken it with small, steady acts. It as possible, if one is careless, to treat such a place as a backdrop for louder histories. But if you listen as you do tonight, it becomes the main story. Empires are made of villages like this, of bread made every day by hands that are not immortal, of tools mended by people whose names are not kept, of paths worn by feet going where they must with the grace that comes from repetition. The Middle Ages contain 1,000 epics, but for most people the epic is a year, and the hero is anyone who rises with the bell, does what is needed, shares what can be shared, and sleeps at last without fear when dawn returns, and it always returns. It will be much the same. The mist will pearl itself on sleeves. The roots will taste the slow broth of the soil. Someone will fasten a cloak against a frisk wind that means nothing and means everything, and the bell will shape the air into a note that says gently, begin again. Stone is not always harsh. In the right light late afternoon, or a dawn that arrives politely, it can look warm, almost woolen. A medieval castle at such an hour is not a fortress of shouting. It is a layered household breathing. Smoke lifts from the bakehouse roof in a calm thread. A gate creaks once as the porter leans out to greet a cart. Far above, on a wall walk that tastes of salt and wind, a watchman wraps his cloak a little tighter and hums the tale of a psalm. The world beyond may be noisy. Inside the walls, the day unfolds with a careful, practiced quiet. The castle wakes early, but not suddenly. In the outer bailey, grooms move like shadows around the stables, rubbing down a grey palfrey whose breath puffs in the cool. Hooves knock gently on packed earth, a rhythm softened by straw. In the mews, a hooded falcon shifts on its perch and clicks its beak. The falconer, unhurried, smooths a feather between finger and thumb and speaks to the bird in a voice so low it barely exists. By the well, a scullion lowers a bucket and listens for the hollow echo that says water is near. Ropes groan, then sing as they rise. A cook's boy, sleeves rolled past his elbows, carries 2 onions like treasure. Inside the great hall, long, high, draughty but dignified rushes have been freshly strewn, herbs tucked among them to sweeten the air. Tapestries climb the walls, hunting scenes, saints, a garden where the trees never lose their leaves. They do not keep out the cold, not really, but they keep out a certain kind of emptiness. At one end, beneath a canopy, the high table waits with a hush that looks like solemnity and is, in truth, only furniture being patient. The fire in the central hearth is not yet grand. It is a good ember, the color of a fox's back. A chapel warms faster. Candles make their little suns. Here, the language is Latin. The motion is kneeling. The air thin with incense. The chaplain moves through prayers like a man walking a path he could find in fog. A page bows awkwardly. A lady's hands, ringed but work-worn, fold over a psalter. Her lips move without sound. Outside again, The bell in the small turret answers the day with a round, deliberate note. If you follow the small noises linen flapping on lines in a side court, a door bar lifted, the slap of dough, you will find the kitchen's wide mouth. It is the engine that looks like a hearth, spits turning, kettles murmuring, the long table that remembers 1,000 honest cuts. Trenchers stack in neat ranks. A woman chops leeks slowly, steady as a clock. Another sorts a haunch with the grace of a woman sowing seed. Bread loaves, dusted and dignified, cool on boards. One will be carried to a reeve in the town below, another to a hermit who prays beside the farm mill, a third set aside for whoever arrives hungry at the parsing gate. Stone teaches thrift, but also hospitality. There is pride in sending food outward. In the armory, metal wakes differently. A squire oils a mail shed loop by loop, a meditative brightness. A sword lies quiet in its scabbard. A dagger is checked for a nick and found sound. Wooden shields lean like dozing men along the wall. In the yard, practice begins no fury, only form. 2 young knights circle each other, half speed, counting their steps. A master-at-arms corrects a stance with 2 fingers on a shoulder. The lesson is not how to win loudly. It is how to avoid being surprised. Not every day is for arms. Many are for administration, which looks like conversation and is, in truth, the castle's heartbeat. In a solar up in the keep, Son finds a window and leans across a table where a clerk has smoothed parchment. He dips, scratches, sand dusts and seals. The steward speaks to a messenger from a manor 3 valleys over. They talk about sheep with the seriousness of diplomats about bridges, as if discussing heirs. A lady leans over a map stitched on linen, rivers in blue silk, roads in brown, and asks the kind of questions that make a household run. How many barrels of ale will winter ask? When to hire extra hands for harvest? Which roofs need thatch before the winds turn rude? Nothing here is dramatic. Everything matters. By midday, the hall brightens. Benches fill. Hands wash in a bowl passed with care. The carver, practiced and precise, does not waste a slice. At the high table, the lord and lady sit not as distant monarchs, but as heads of a complicated family kin, household officers, guests whose names will be remembered or gently forgotten depending on the grace they bring. Before eating, a silence. After eating, a soft rise of talk. News travels along wood and linen like a rumor that has learned manners. Somewhere a harper tunes, then does not play, sensing that today the hall prefers the company of knives and spoons. In warm months, life climbs to the walls. Look outward, beyond the ditch. A slope grazed close by sheep. Beyond that, strips of field like cloth lay to dry. Beyond those, a wood dark enough to keep its secrets. Look inward, a small garden terraced against the keep, where rosemary tries to be a tree. A bench worn smooth by listening. A cat that lives here without belonging to anyone. On days when the air is kind, a lady brings her embroidery frame to this place and works at a stag's antlers with thread that knows more browns than the eye would think exist. She pauses to watch swallows cut the sky into invisible shapes and smiles without reason. Travel is the loudest thing the castle does. When the household moves because duty or season or the need to be seen demands it, the world stirs. Carts stack with chests and bedding. A convoy arranges itself. Lists are checked with a care that looks like love. In the stables, harness bells test their voices. On the morning of departure, the lord greets the porter, the falconer, the smith. A child runs twice around a cart before being collected. The chaplain blesses a road the rain has just made darker. The gate opens, the bridge lays its back across the ditch, and the procession sighs forward, not grand, simply determined. Those who remain are not lonely. Stone keeps its own company. Evenings are best. When work is a memory and obligations shrink to a ring of light, warmth gathers. In the hall, candles multiply and turn faces gold. A storyteller is asked, then asked again, then finally agrees to tell the tale everyone wants. How a certain saint fed a certain wolf, or how a knight returned from a war with more mercy than when he had left. The benches ease, the fire takes its time, and the tapestries stop being decoration and become night gardens where the eye can rest. Somewhere behind a screen, a child fights sleep and loses. Someone recites a line of French he learned in a better year, and is pleased by how it still fits in his mouth. If there is a feast, it arrives not as an assault, but as a tide. Platters pass. A pie gives up its steam. Spices rare enough to be counted offer their small miracles and pass on. There is ceremony, yes, but the kind that understands the point is not the show but the sharing. The lord stands and says a thing that needs saying. The lady sends a dish to an old retainer who thinks himself invisible. A jester risks a mild truth and survives. Later, when the rush of abundance has receded, the floor is swept, the dogs curl nearer the heat, and a cup makes one last circuit with whatever is left. Night does not end the castle. It only changes its pulse. The watch keeps to its round. Footsteps echo once and are gone. The portcullis chain breathes in sleep. In the chapel, one candle is allowed to keep vigil for all the others. In the solar, on a table by the window, a small chess game remains mid-problem. The white knight paused between squares, deciding. In the nursery, a nurse hums the only song that works every time. In the mews, the falcons dream of sky they have never flown. The castle is not at war. It is at rest. Winter finds stone at its kindest. Walls hold heat like memory. Windows batten. Hangings are doubled. Fur lines the cuffs that will touch snow. The kitchen becomes a hearth for more than food, a place where news bakes. Wood smoke writes its long sentence in the air. The hall closes itself around the nearest laughter. Work continues, but with winter's courtesy, mending harness, darning wool, planning the garden as if spring needed encouragement. The chaplain reads by a square of light while his breath is a small fog. The steward, unfazed by frost, jacks barrels with a knuckle and can tell by sound if the ale will last. Outside, the moat wears a brittle lid and cracks politely when a duck lands. Everyone agrees to walk slower, even the strict things soften. Etiquette in summer is edge and angle. In winter, it is a kindly curve. A page spills and is not scolded. A squire yawns and is sent to bed. A guest who has told the same story twice is allowed a third telling because the third is better. Stone forgives in cold weather. It remembers that it, too, is only earth arranged. What does a castle mean, really, when it is not repelling anyone? It means steadiness. It means a place where grain becomes bread and fear becomes proportion. It means a height from which to read the valleys, weather, and a depth in which to store the summer's grace. It means that somewhere, in an age we call dark because we have forgotten how carefully it kept its lights, a community could gather under a roof that would not run away when the wind misunderstood itself. When you leave the castle because stories ask us to move, you notice things you did not notice on the way in. The bridge boards have the smoothness that comes only from many safe crossings. The porter's stool is worn where 1,000 elbows have rested. The gate's iron teeth look fierce and are mostly ceremonial. The fields beyond lie close as are. Cloak. The road waits, confident. Listen once more. The bell. The dog barking once and then hoping it was enough. The faint shape of a song from the kitchen where someone is finishing the long day by being kind to a pot. The sky puts on its deeper blue. The first star arrives late and exactly on time. Stone cools. Tapestries become night. In a corner room, a rider sets his boots side by side as if they were two strangers learning to be friends. Then quiet, the kind that chooses you, the castle sleeps. Before the village stirs and long after the castle's watch has passed, a different place tends time with a gentler instrument. A monastery does not wake with alarm. It opens like a book. The first bell of the day matin sounds in the stillest. Dark. A low round note that seems to come not from metal but from the stone itself. The brothers rise without hurry. Sandals find cool floors. What habits whisper? A candle is lifted, becomes a small moon in a corridor, and leads the way to prayer. The chapel breathes warmth into the night. Candles bloom along the choir, and the smell of beeswax and cedar floats with the smoke. The chant begins no sharp edges, only a line of sound that drifts through arches and into the chest, where it settles like a soft weight. Latin words fall in patient syllables, learned by mouths that have said them more times than they have counted. The psalms do not demand belief, they offer rhythm. Outside, Frost writes delicate grammar on the cloister walk. Inside, the bell marks the next hour, and the next. Morning arrives as if it had been invited and asked to use its inside voice. In the cloister, a square garden enclosed by walkways, the day takes shape. Herb beds crouch close to the warmed earth. Sage, rue, mint, fennel. Bees practice their letters. A brother pauses to cup a sprig, then rubs his fingers to remember the scent for later. Rosemary to sharpen the mind, lavender to calm it. Time for a stubborn cough. The infirmarian tends small phials that catch the light. Oils, tinctures, honey. He works slowly, as if time were a liquid that prefers not to be spilled. Beyond the garden, the buildings are arranged like sentences around a meaning. There is the chapter house, where brothers sit on stone benches to hear reading from the rule and to confess small failings with the candor that makes community possible. I was late to Lord's. I lost patience with the novice. I took an extra heel of bread. There is the refectory, where meals are taken in silence while a single voice reads from a book that smells of vellum and dust and rain. There is the dormitory, plain and clean, where beds are not counted as possessions and sleep is understood to be a gift that belongs to the next day. There is the scriptorium. The scriptorium is winter's sun court indoors. Windows are placed to the south and east, broad and clear as the glaziers could contrive. Light pours across slanted desks. There is the soft scrape of a knife trimming, a quill, the gentle rasp of pumice smoothing vellum, the tiny click of a pen laid on a shell of ink to drink. The room smells of things that have agreed to become language. Calfskin washed and stretched. Oak galls turned to iron black. Gum Arabic, sweet as a faint memory. A scribe bends, inhales, draws a line as deliberate as devotion. Letters are not thrown, they are planted. A hand trained over years advances across the page like a good plough straight, even, turning and returning without waste. The script is chosen with care, a round, friendly minuscule that even a tired eye can love, or a tall, precise textura that stacks like a small city. Capitals bloom with vines, birds, and beasts that have wandered in from the garden and the forest of the scribe's memory. Sometimes a letter receives a thin breath of gold, laid with a brush so fine it could have been grown from the feather itself. When the gold takes, the light in the room changes. It is as if the page remembers the sun and carries it indoors. Pigments wait in shells along the desk's edge. Red from madder, green from verdigris, yellow from saffron and from earth, blue from azurite, and on rare days when a patron has been very generous, the deep blue made from lapis lazuli ground to heaven's dust. Each color has a sound, the whisper of a brush on prepared skin, the soft clink of a shell set down, the breath the scribe takes before committing a leaf to permanent summer. A simple initial becomes a garden becomes a prayer. Not all the work is beautiful, some is faithful. Margins are ruled with lead. Page numbers, where they exist, are small and shy. If a scribe errs, he scrapes with a sharp knife until the mistake becomes a thin cloud, then smooths the place with a nail or a tooth to make it accept ink again. There is a humility in this that does not need a sermon. Every book is an accumulated mercy, error, patience, correction, grace. Sometimes a note escapes into the margin. It is very cold today. Pray for the scribe. What a tiresome fly. These are not jokes. They are proofs that the hand and the heart were present on the same day. The book itself is a creature of many hands. A parchment measured and stretched the skins on a wooden frame, each piece tightened like a lute string until it could hold words without warping. A pricker set tiny holes along the edges for the ruling. A scribe made the text, an illuminator, the images, a rubricator, the red titles. A binder stitched gatherings of leaves through wooden boards and drew them into a spine so neat that time would fail before it did. Clasps were fixed plain or proud as if teaching pages how to sleep. When finished, the book went to the armarium, the library's cupboard, where it waited in drifted light for a hand that would read it into breath again. This is one kind of labor. There are others, equally necessary, equally quiet. The lay brothers thresh and mend. The gardener listens to roots. The cellarer measures oil with the honesty that keeps a winter kind. The man at the mill sets the water to work like a patient animal. In the brew house, steam makes its own weather. In the bakehouse, crusts learn the language of heat. A monastery tends the body as carefully as the soul, not because it distrusts the body, but because it understands that bread and prayer are cousins. Not all who walk the cloister stay forever. Travelers come, dust in their hems and news in their mouths. The porter greets them. Bread is cut, salt offered, water poured, a place at the warm edge of a fire found without fuss. Hospitality has a rule and a face. The face is welcome. The rule is simple. If a stranger arrives, he is Christ for as long as it takes to find him a bed. At dusk, the guest masters move through the spaces where the day has hidden itself, checking blankets and bowls with the competence that looks like kindness because it is. Silence is not an emptiness here. It is a cloth laid over the day to keep it warm. Even in silence, communication passes a nod at the well. A hand set briefly on a shoulder. The dexterities of sign the brothers used to ask for bread, books, or more wood for the fire. After Compline, when the final hymns have smoothed the day to its edges, the great silence begins. Voices rest. Feet remember quiet. The night belongs to God and to sleep, but the monastery is not aloof. It leans into the world from many doors. In spring, brothers go out with baskets of seedlings and return with news of lambing. In summer, they travel to farms that are rent in grain, and they do not gloat when the season is thin. They subtract, forgiving the difference with a sentence and a smile. In autumn, they give cider to neighbors who cannot press their own. In winter, they take in a child for a month because the cottage roof failed and the snow was unambitious and then not. The monastery keeps accounts that the exchequer will never see. Learning lives here without spectacle. A novice stumbles through his first Latin declensions. A patient master lets correction be a small bell, not a whip. In the library, a brother copies not only scripture but medicine, histories, poems that sleep like bright animals between lines. A bestiary marvels, sometimes incorrectly, at the habits of lions and pelicans. The book is wrong often and useful anyway, because wonder is a discipline too. In another margin, someone has drawn a cat pursuing a mouse around a capital letter D, and the cat is so intent that you can hear his claws clicking in the scriptorium if you lean close enough. Time here is thick. The bell parcels the day, and the day answers with obedience and relief. Between the hours, work. Between the work, breath. Between the breath, small pleasures. The taste of an apple stored perfectly. A patch of sunlight caught on a wall where a brother rests his back for a moment longer than necessary. The sound of rain rehearsing the roofs. In winter, candlelight makes long afternoons shorter. In summer, the cloister fountain is a small lyric. The rule asks little and everything. Stability, conversion of life, obedience, words that could be heavy, but inside these walls become gradual, like a season. Not all monasteries are the same. Some are Benedictine black habits, older songs, a habit of smiling at visitors who expected something sterner. Some are Cistercian white habits, fewer ornaments, architecture that looks like silence made of stone. But all of them keep, with variations, this idea that the world is better when a place exists where prayer is unbroken, where bread is reliably baked, where books are made slowly enough that a single page can hold a century. If you were to walk the cloister at dusk, when the sky has decided on blue and the first star has presented itself to anyone still looking, you would see the day put itself away. A broom leaned just so, a knife cleaned, dried, given back to its place, a page left open with a quill laid across it like a resting bird. Brothers pass you without surprise, because in a place like this even a visitor becomes part of the pattern. By the second hour, the bell calls. The sound crosses the garden, touches the pear tree, slips along the stones that remember feet, and the community reassembles itself as easily as water refines its shape after you have put your hand into it. And withdrawn, night folds. The last candle in the scriptorium is pinched out with a wetted thumb and forefinger. The last ember in the kitchen is encouraged into safety. In the dormitory, the breathing of many men makes a single long creature asleep and kind. The monastery does not lock itself against fear. It rests, because rest is part of its work. The chant you heard before dawn will return, everywhere and exactly, and the day will open like a book again, vellum, ink, and a hand steady enough to write what the centuries ask to be remembered, and somewhere in the armarium, behind a door that sticks when it rains, a finished manuscript waits. Its leather closes, its clasps lie quiet. Inside, a colophon says in a hand no one living now can own, this book was finished in the year of grace. Pray for the scribe who wrote it. The request is not sentimental. It is an old courtesy among those who know how much of any good work is patience. Tomorrow, a novice will copy the same page you just imagined. The letters will sit more confidently. A leaf will receive its gold. The bell will speak its soft command. The world beyond the walls will go on being noisy where it chooses. And here, in this well of slowness, 1,000 small fidelities will be added to the sum of what keeps a civilization human. A town wakes differently from a village. It does not stretch all at once. It uncurls by streets, by trades, by bells. Dawn slides down slate roofs, touches the high spine of a church, finds a weathercock, and then spills into lanes where shutters are lifted with a wooden sigh. Somewhere, a baker's door opens and gives the air a warm, clean breath of crust and grain. Somewhere else, a window is pushed wide and hung with yarn the color of late summer plums. A dog makes a small circle of possession and then gives the street back to the people. The first cart on the cobbles sounds like memory the town wears. Its order in stone and timber. A wall encircles it curved like a patient arm with gates that think in directions. East for the market, west for the road to the fair, south for the bridge, north for the fields people pretend not to miss. Within the wall, houses lean together as if in long conversation, upper stories jetted out above shopfronts, beams darkened by years of weather and hands. At the center stands the church or the cathedral, quietly tall, its spire and index finger pointing at a place beyond worry. Near it, A square where the ground has been swept by feet into a kind of shine. Market day is not a surprise. It is a rhythm. Stores appear as if grown overnight, board across barrel, cloth over rope, poles that remember exactly where to stand. A fishmonger arranges the morning's catch on beds of river reeds. A cheesewife cuts a wheel and offers a sliver like a promise. A potter sets out bowls that make the light like them. A man with nothing but salt is, for an hour, a very important man. Wasted like sleeping animals beside scales. Measures, pegs, and bushels are tested with a flat palm. People argue with the pleasure of formality. The town crier passes, ringing a bell that says, "Listen, only for a moment." To the larger town beyond your booth, trades wake on their own clocks. In a lane the color of smoke, fullers beat wool with the stubborn patience of river hammers, working lanolin and water into cloth until it stops pretending to be anything but cloth. In the dye house, a vat of woad reveals its secret that blue is not born blue, but turns blue when air kisses the cloth, and apprentices watch a miracle happen. So often it becomes a lesson in timing. At the tanner's, the smell is a kind of truth. Hides hang, future shoes and girdles, while men move among them with the gait of those who have learned where not to bump a shoulder. Down the street, the cordwainer cuts a last, runs a finger along a seam as if smoothing a wrinkle from a child's brow. The goldsmith tilts his tiny furnace and coaxes the metal to remember its own melting. The stationer stacks sheets of parchment that feel like polite weather. The bookbinder's thread smiles. Guilds give the town its grammar. Their halls timbered, painted, sometimes tenderly grand-hold rules more careful than most laws. A master is made not by a certificate, but by a thing made properly. A chest with corners that keep their corners. A brooch that catches the eye without shouting. A loaf that weighs what it should in both hands and heart. A journeyman arrives with a bundle and a hope. An apprentice arrives with a mother's caution and a father's pride. Patterns are learned. Move your hand like this. Count to 10 here, never 9. Leave the work better than you found it. Pride sits on these benches, yes, but it is the kind of pride that likes to share a bench. The river is the town's second road. Along the wharf, cranes turn their wooden necks, and bales of wool settle like tame beasts. A cog rides low, its belly full of rye from far harbours. A barge lists gently under hops that will become an autumn's kindness. Porters call to each other in a dialect of sound and gesture older than language. A clerk leans on a bollard, tally. Stick in hand, the clean notches a quick book that rain cannot smudge. Above him, a warehouse window opens and closes like a blink as sacks are taken and given. A boy counts in his head and will remember later that numbers can be friends if you walk with them every day. Money moves through this life, but quietly. On the stone bench under a carved sign, a money changer sets out his scales and his nest of little weights, bright, precise, persuasive. Coins from many mints clink down. Pennies with kings whose names the town has not learned to pronounce. Florins with lilies that tell of a river city far away. Ducats that carry on their faces the memory of ships. He tests, he weighs, he squints, he nods. A merchant comes with a folded paper Italian writing, long and beautiful, and calls it a letter of exchange. The money changer smiles a little because this is the new way. Gold without gold, a promise that weighs nothing and crosses mountains easily. The old way and the new sit side by side, and are content to share a stool dotted to the bridge. The town counts itself. The toll house keeps a ledger. The bridge wardens watch with the air of men who love a structure. Wheels roll over timbers polished by years of passage. Their drum is the meter by which the day makes its poem. Pilgrims cross, lighter than merchants, and are charged less for their hunger. A carter from the uplands pays in kind, a side of bacon that will hang in the toll house rafters and be remembered in the cold month. A drover's dogs pace, and their paws tap the tale of how sheep make cities possible. Dot in the square. The hour bell gives the day its spine. For those in counting houses, the bell is a metronome. For those at looms, it is a reason to lift eyes and then lower them again with less ache. The town's clock, if it has one, is a new marvel, gears and weights behind a face painted with a blue that is allowed to be called heaven. No one trusts it entirely. They trust the bell. If the clock and the bell disagree, the baker smiles and gives the bell the last word. Bread knows time better than iron. Letters move on feet, in saddlebags, tucked into the hems of travelling friars who understand both roots and secrets. News arrives from fairs where the ground has been flattened by bargains. Champagne, with its tents like a field of tame clouds. St. Denis, where the church watches commerce and commerce watches the church. Bruges, where water carries more languages than any school. From the north come stories of Hanseatic towns. Ilbeck, Bremen, Danzig, where ships are the shape of ambition, and tar is the smell of morning. From the south come names that taste like spices. Pisa, Genoa, Venice. A child collecting place names discovers that the world is larger than the map on the wall in the schoolhouse, and is comforted, not frightened, by that fact. Inns gather the roads into rooms, under signs that paint animals more cheerfully than life can manage a white hart, a swan, a green dragon. Benches sit ready for backs that do not prefer softness. A pot hangs, convinced of its usefulness. Bread arrives with the honest gravity of supper. Here, a merchant practicing his French adds a new word for credit. There, a carter learns from a pilgrim the shortest way over a hill he has climbed for 20 years. The host understands that hospitality is not food alone. It is a room where strangers become a company. The town is not only the day's work, it is also its kindness. On certain evenings, the guilds process in good order, candles like small citizens in their hands, to the church where walls are painted with stories for the days when words are too tired. A saint's statue is lifted and carried, careful as bread. Windows, tight with colored glass, loosen stories into light. A singer, paid in ale and gratitude, finds the note that makes the rafters understand they are part of an instrument. Someone who has forgotten how to pray remembers how to listen. A child who has not yet learned to read learns to look up. There are seasons even in stone places. In spring, carts arrive high with wool, and the air in the weaver's quarter learns a new heft. Summer warms the market into generosity, fruits that stain the fingers, onions sweet enough to eat without apology, eels like punctuation in the fishmonger's pan. Autumn gathers trade into fairs and barns. Town gates swing more often. Scales are busier. Ledgers fatten. Winter folds the streets into themselves, and smoke gives the rooftops a way to talk about the warmth below. The river thickens along the edges, and the bridge delights in being useful. Not all is tidy. There are rules for refuse and rules for pigs and rules for where to pour the rinse water when the moon is bright enough to make people careless. The town council reads them aloud sometimes, half as reminder, half as comedy. A beadle makes a note, then scratches it out when the offender is found sitting on his own doorstep with a broom. The leper's bell sounds at the far edge. The almoner answers at the near edge with a loaf wrapped in good cloth. The hospital spare, clean, kind washes faces and sheets and souls as best it can. Charity is not a theatre here. It is one. More trade, learned and practiced. It is easy to imagine such a town as a machine, but it is more like a garden cultivated, watched, corrected, encouraged. A child runs an errand and carries 2 kinds of news home. The herb he was sent for and the face the apothecary made when he asked for it. A widow mends shirts for men who cannot sew, and in that way rewrites the day to include herself. A clerk copies a contract with flourished letters that make a simple promise look like a prayer. A constable leans on a halberd and, not needing to use it, feels successful. A bell rings the Angelus, and a cart stops, and a team of horses blinks as if it had been interrupted at a word it knew by heart. Night is a softer order. Shutters come to, one by one, like eyes deciding to rest. Lanterns step down the lanes with their small, responsible light. A watchman absorbs the town into his stride. His staff taps a calm punctuation on the cobbles. Somewhere a scribe boils his pen and puts it to bed. Somewhere else an apprentice, released from his master's bench, stands on the bridge and counts the stars, no longer needing their names to fill their company. The river talks to itself. The town hears without listening. You could live an entire life in such a place and say, when asked, that nothing extraordinary happened. It would not be true. The extraordinary in a town is the sum of 1,000 ordinary accuracies. Bread that weighs what it should. Cloth that keeps a family warm. A toll fairly taken and fairly used. A beam that does not fail in a winter wind. A letter delivered on time. A promise kept even when no one is watching. Empires are murmured into being by streets like these, by hands that set out wares, sweep thresholds, count coins, and close shutters gently so that sleep can find the house when morning comes again. It will begin as it did today. The church will catch the light first, and the baker will convince the heir to remember grain, and the market square will become, in an hour, a poem about adequacy. A bell will ring. People will lift their heads. The town will go to work, which is to say it will sing. Faith in medieval Europe did not live only on altars. It lived in footpaths and kitchens, in fields and doorways, in stories that knew the way home. It was not an argument held in the head so much as a rhythm kept by the heart. Bells gave it measure. Candles gave it shape. And legends, those patient travelers gave it a face you could recognize even in bad weather. Morning begins with a small sound, the bell for prime. It climbs the air and settles on thatch and slate, curls into barns, taps at shutters not as command but as invitation. The day answers by washing, by tying laces, by lighting the first small flame. In the parish church, breath forks in the cold while a priest in linen whispers words older than the roof. Children lean on a mother's sleeve and learn without knowing that they are learning. Outside, a rooster finishes the Alleluia with noisy confidence. Faith wears the year like a cloak with many fastenings. Candlemas in winter smooths light over faces. Palms in spring lay their green hands across the street. Easter breaks out of stone and bread and returns color to the world. Rogation days walk the fields with prayer, not to charm crops into obedience, but to make gratitude visible along the hedges. At Whitsun, white cloth flares like a quiet fire. St. John's Eve rolls wheels of light under a watchful eye and lets old joy pretend to be brand new. Michaelmas tastes of geese. All Hallows and All Souls teach the village to speak the names of the dead as if they were on the far side of a thin curtain. Advent holds its breath, then Christ Mass gives it back. As song, legends thread through this weave. A local saint is a neighbor with a better story, a bishop who fed wolves, a shepherd who found a spring with his staff, a girl who kept her vow when the wind was unkind. Their bones, or a splinter of a bone, or a cloth that once kissed the bone rest. In carved reliquaries shaped like churches, small enough to lift, or arms, or shining boxes on lion feet. A procession carries the reliquary through lanes that remember snow and dust and summer's bees. People touch the silk that covers it and pretend they have touched the saint's patience. And if they cry a little, no one makes a fuss. Faith is allowed to be a soft thing in public. Stained glass is a library you can walk inside. In towns and cities where stone has learned to float, windows rise like gardens held in air. Light falls through apostles, kings, parables, beasts that know how to tell the truth even when they are not real. On winter afternoons, the nave becomes a pool of moving color. A boy stares at a blue that came from crushed stone carried across deserts. He forgets his errands. No one scolds him, because everyone remembers their own first hour under these windows, when the world turned into a kindly lantern and it seemed possible that stories were stronger than weather. The church's floor keeps other secrets. In one cathedral, a labyrinth is set in stone, an inward road measured for the body. For days when pilgrimage cannot be made with feet, people walk it slowly, letting turns quiet them. Those who cannot walk trace it with a finger and discover that an inward journey can be a faithful one too. Inside chapels, small lamps hold the names of the dead. The flames are short and stubborn. A mason's mark hides in a corner and says plainly, "I was here, and I left this neatness behind." Pilgrimage is how faith practices walking. Roads knit shrines together, to Compostela along tracks that smell of heather, to Canterbury where the English earth listens, to Rome where stones remember more feet than any other place can count, to 100 smaller sanctuaries where a single story changed the water or tamed the wind. Pilgrims carry scallop shells, badges stamped in lead, bits of ribbon, letters from parishes that will pray them home. They carry also their reasons, grief, promise, thanksgiving, curiosity, the desire to stand where someone holy once stood and see whether the world looks kinder from there. Along the way, inns make room, barns loan straw, monasteries open a door that does not ask for coins. A pilgrim learns the country by the taste of its bread and the kindness of its wells. Faith visits the street as theatre. On feast days, wagons are turned into stages and rolled to the square. Mystery plays speak Genesis, Nativity, Passion in a language that does not ask permission from Latin to be devout. Heaven is a painted canopy, hell a dragon mouth that belches. Cloth fire on a rope pulled by a laughing carpenter. A Noah with sawdust on his cuffs argues with a wife whose scolding is better than most sermons. A weaver's son, eyes wide, discovers that the world can tell truth with jokes and does not forget it. When the plays move on to the next corner, the square smells of ale and ash and something like relief. Legends walk beyond the church door into hedges and kitchens. A certain oak is older than most things. No one cuts it, and no one writes down why. A spring tastes sweeter than the stream that feeds it. Someone tied a rag to the nearby thorn and was comforted. Now there are many rags. A charm begins in the name of the Father and ends with words that rhyme as only old walls can rhyme. Faith does not object. It nods and goes along, making room for the way people carry hope in whatever container fits their hands. Inside houses, faith is domestic. A sprig of box from Palm Sunday tucked behind a beam. A cross scored with a knife on a new lintel. A candle lit for labor pains, for his safe return, for the hour between wolf and dog. A travelling friar sits at the bench and speaks of mercy. A parish priest knows who is hungry and where to send a loaf. A mother's prayer is a list hidden in a lullaby. A father's prayer is the extra nail driven into a door so it will not warp in rain. Cathedrals and abbeys rise over lifetimes. A grandfather saw the first trench cut for the apse. His grandson lifts the last stone to the vault. Between them, scaffolds, cranes of treadwheel, stone whispered into shape by chisels that do not hurry. The master mason sets a plumb line that falls like truth. Apprentices learn the patience of corners. When the keystone comes home and the arch learns that gravity is not an enemy, the town inhales. Bells tell the air what has happened. People gather, not because they understand the geometry, but because they understand belonging. When rain begins, the new gutters speak their steady syllable, and it is a kind of hymn. Faith also keeps company with doubt, and knows how to sit with it without scolding. Bad years come plague that turns a parish into a ledger of losses. Harvests that forget to be generous. Wars that spend courage like coin. The church answers in ways that change with time, with processions that ask heaven to remember mercy, with hospitals that smell of vinegar and thyme, with funerals that do not pretend death is a stranger, but do not let it be a tyrant either. All Souls gathers the names and sets them in the mouth of the community until grief feels less like drowning and more like a river one can learn to ford. Stories widen in these hours. A saint whose tale was only a line becomes a whole page. He brought bread at night. She visited the sick when the city was afraid. He sold a cup he loved to buy a blanket for a stranger. Miracles do not always move weather or heal swiftly. Sometimes they are smaller. A quarrel paused, a door left unbolted, a debt forgiven because a bell rang and made a heart remember what it wants to be when it is honest. Not all holiness is set in glass. Sometimes it is a neighbor who returns your measure unshaved and your basket uncracked. A midwife who knows when to tell a joke. A miller who shortens his own bag in a thin year. A young mason who leaves his mark in a place no one will see and smiles because God will. These are not tales for banners. They are the common grammar of goodness, and the century is written in them as plainly as in any charter dotted dusk. Faith becomes lamp. The nave grows gold. A choir finds a note that makes stone friendly. The priest lifts his hands, and people farmers, dyers, carters, widows with hands like dry leaves, children with scuffed knees lift their hearts as if they were lighter than bread. When the dismissal comes, go in peace they do, not because the world is easier, but because the world is not empty. Night carries the last offices. Compline speaking calm over beds, over worries shelved like tools, over the wrinkle in a forehead that will relax after the third amen. Candles go out one by one. A last ember in the grate thinks about being a star and then decides to sleep. Outside, a wind tries a door and finds it caught by a latch made by a smith who understood the weight of nights. Somewhere a pilgrim reaches the edge of a town and sees its spire like a lifted finger. He is late, but a fiery light still burns. He smiles the tired smile that says a bed is near. Tomorrow he will carry a badge stamped in Pewter Thomas's sword, James's shell, Mary's rose, and it will chime softly when he walks, a private bell. What does faith mean in such an age? It means that a story can keep you warm, that a window can teach without speaking, that a procession can hold a village together for long enough to remember who it is, that bones in a box can remind the living, that courage outlasts anguish, that bread made carefully can be Christ and can also be bread for the hungry who did not make it to Mass, that a name spoken in November can feel like a hand held across an absence. When morning comes, bells will climb the air again. The same saints will keep their watch. The same legends will dress themselves in fresh breath and walk the same lanes to the same hearts. And somewhere a child will watch sunlight sliding through colored glass and decide without telling anyone that the world is larger, kinder, and more accurate than she had been told. That decision will be a prayer. It will last. Night gathers like a shawl, town by town, field by field, stone by stone. The day sighs. The bell notes shorten, and the world remembers how to be quiet. In a village, the last water is drawn. In a castle, the porter lowers the bar. In a monastery, Compline slides the day into its proper drawer. In a market town, shutters meet and make a soft line across the street like closed eyes. If you walk gently, you can hear the Middle Ages leaning back into themselves, not as darkness, but as rest, begin where the paths are dirt and the roofs are straw. A cottage door eases to, leaving a sluice of firelight on the lane. Hens fuss once and then accept the night. The hearth exhales. A pot set near its lip ticks as metal forgets heat. Bread is wrapped in cloth. A small prayer is said with the same hands that kneaded it. A child turns and tucks one foot under the other as if they were two animals learning to share a bed. Outside, the cows breathe the slow breath of animals that know things people guess at. Frost, if it comes, will write its theme letters on the sill by morning. Tonight, it is only a possibility no one needs to discuss. Up on the hill, stone makes its own warmth. The castle's inner court has gone to embers and echoes. A watchman lifts a hood and settles it so the world will not argue with his ears. His staff taps the rhythm the walls expect. Step, step, turn. Step, step, turn. In the mews, a falcon dreams of a sky it will know tomorrow afternoon. In the stable, a grey paw free stamps once in its sleep. A squire, laid to bed, sets his boots side by side because his mother once told him that order is a way of thanking the day. In the great hall, tapestries turn from picture to weather, holding a hush against the draught. Someone has left a chess game mid-problem in a solar. The white knight leans toward a square it will visit in the morning, and no sooner. Across the fields, where the river makes lace out of moonlight, the monastery becomes a lamp. The cloister garden is black and silver. The well blinks. In the dormitory, the breathing of many men joins into one long creature sleeping, calm and beneficial. The scriptorium, which held a small sun all afternoon, is dark except for one careful flame at the altar of a side oratory. The bell rope hangs like a plum, line drawn through the day. In a cupboard, a finished book rests, clasps folded, cold asleep. A colophon whispering a request for prayer that will still be understood when everyone who can read it has learned to sleep longer. Down in the town, night has its own guild. Lanterns keep the lanes. The watch calls the hour in a voice that belongs to no one and to all. Cats become serious. The bridge counts fewer wheels and more stars. In the dye lane, vats cool and turn their thoughts inward. In the baker's quarter, the first tomorrow is already being coaxed from grain. Somewhere an apprentice leans on a sill and listens to the river invent a story it will never finish. In an inn, a pilgrim sets his scallop shell on the bench beside him so it need not jab his ribs when he dreams. The host sweeps once, twice, then lets the broom stand like a guest who will not take a hint. The sign creaks. Ale settles in barrels like patience. Faith is the night's quiet grammar. The last candle in a nave makes an obedient pour on stone. A small flame keeps company with names in a side chapel. It does not tire. In houses, a sprig of box tucked in a beam watches over beds. A mother lays a hand on a child's hair and makes a benediction without words. Somewhere a bell rings the late hour, and someone finishes a quarrel the way you close a book that is not worth a candle. The road between places loosens and softens. Hedgerows keep their secrets. Owls inherit the air. Travellers, if any, clink and rustle just enough to remind one another that comfort is a virtue and courage is small. A wayside cross glows wetter than the night around it, a votive in a little niche persuades itself it is a star. The wind changes its mind twice, then decides to be polite. The frost, if it arrives, will find the ruts ready for it. Inside rooms, time shrinks kindly. Wool remembers shoulders. Linen remembers skin. Rushes, newly strewn, keep a faint memory of sweetness. A psaltery or a small harp is returned to its corner. A dog makes the sound that means dreams without trouble. The fire slopes into red. Windows, leaded and patient, hold the moon in imperfect squares. A person with worries arranges them like knives, then lays a cloth over them and lets sleep negotiate a truce. Think of all the hands that have earned this quiet, the hands that turn soil to furrows and furrows to grain, that set barley to mash and mash to ale, that cut stone until it consented to arch, that drew neat letters until a page knew what century it lived in, that weighed cloth honestly, that led a horse from coal to hay, that took a stranger's pack and said, "Rest, the day in such an age is labor, the night is gratitude," and yet the world keeps working kindly in the dark. Yeast is busy. Seeds consider themselves. Water remembers where it is supposed to go. In the armory, ore leans its scent against iron and makes a promise. In the infirmary, a posset cools just enough to be useful. In the bell tower, the rope is a quiet apostle of morning. In the market square, the cobbles store the heat of yesterday in puddles that will be iced by dawn if the sky insists. The town clock might mutter something ambitious to itself. The bell smiles and decides the schedule. If you could stand on a ridge and listen to a whole country sleeping, you would hear not silence but a woven hush. Breath, river, animal, ember. Air over stone, water over wheel. A watchman's staff, a nun's whisper, a child's sigh, the small percussive gratitude of calling bread. You would understand why bells were given so much authority. They did not command. They gathered. They took this wide, soft quilt of sounds and attached them gently to time. Toward morning, the world rehearses waking. A rooster tries a note and is embarrassed by it. The last stars feel less necessary. In the castle, a cook's boy turns and does not drop the onions. In the monastery, the first brother to rise thinks he hears rain, then decides it is only leaves, remembering to be leaves. In the town, a baker's door opens and the street forgives every argument it overheard yesterday. In the village, a dog stands, stretches, and believes in the day again. When the bell speaks, it sounds new and familiar at once. Prime, it is only a note, but it is also a sentence. Begin again. The cottage stirs, the gate lifts, the psalm resumes its long breath, the market squares its shoulders, the road accepts feet. Whatever we have called this time medieval, middle, between showed people how to let day and night keep each other honest. It is a lesson that does not grow old. Work with care, worship without hurry, share bread, tell stories, close your shutters gently. Trust sleep to do some of tomorrow's work. You may close your eyes now. Imagine the bell as near as your own breath, the fire as sure as your own pulse, the road as patient as your own spine. The Middle Ages, for all their iron and wood, knew how to rest. Let them teach you. The night is kind. Morning knows the way. History likes its banners and its battles, but a civilization is stitched together at the hearth. In medieval Europe, the day's arithmetic was done with loaves and ladles, with a pinch of salt and a careful eye on the simmering pot. Kitchens, humble or grand, were where time was seasoned and households learned the art of enough. Morning begins with the small courage of a fire coaxed from last night's embers. A hand that knows the stove's mood places kindling where it will take. A breath persuades it gently. A twist of straw decides the matter. Heat answers with a soft roar, not fierce, just confident. Near it, dough wakes under linen. The loaf to come was started yesterday, flour sifted by palm, water poured until the bowl remembered a pond, a sour leaven folded in like a returned traveler. A wrist kneads until the dough learns to be one thing instead of many. The baker's test is simple: press, release. If the dough sighs back, it is ready to wait. Ovens are neighbors with personalities. A village bake oven of clay and stone keeps the memory of last week's heat. A castle oven demands more wood and less patience. A town baker's long-mouthed oven eats whole mornings and returns them as bread you can carry home like a quiet victory. To test readiness, a wisp of straw is thrown onto hot brick. If it browns without burning, the dough is brushed and the day's little planets round loaves, scored like signatures, slide in on a wooden pill. The door is stopped. The kitchen exhales. Somewhere, a child is sent out to watch the chimney and learn the language of smoke that says when to look inside. Bread here is not a luxury. It is a grammar. Muslin loaves wheat with the courtesy of rye or barley hold their shape and their duty. A better white bread appears on feast days at high tables, but shares its bench with brown. Both taste of work and weather. Trencher bread, baked firm, becomes plate and then feed for pigs not offended by gravy. Blessing is not a spectacle. It is a kiss of the hand to the loaf's warm back. A cross made with a knife for reasons both pious and practical. Crust crackles. Crumbs report honestly on the oven's temper. Ale is the village's second kindness. In the cool house where barrels nap, a mash tun remembers the stir of mold and hot water, the slow drift toward sweetness. The smell is field and cellar at once. Yeast quiet, invisible. Busy links hands with sugars and begins its small music. A woman with sleeves rolled and a mind for timing skims, stirs, watches, harps in some regions, herbs in others. The result is a drink that keeps mouths from arguing with the river and tables from going empty of conversation. In a year when wells are jealous or streams untrustworthy, ale is a physician. It carries the day gently from noon to dusk. And no, one says so because everyone knows, around the hearth, other labors measure the seasons. In spring, milk is generous. Cheeses begin as curdled modesty and become, with salt and patience, wheels with opinions. A house learns the calendar by its shelves, fresh, soft, eaten quickly. Then firmer, turned daily, rubbed with brine. Later, hard, tight in cloth, fit to travel the winter. Butter arrives by elbow and will. The churn's thump is a comfort that makes the room sound inhabited. A child waits, then tastes the first sweet slip from a spoon, as if the cow had learned alchemy. Cabbage, leeks, onions, peas, beans when the year remembers them. Apples stored on wooden slats, so their breath won't persuade each other to rot. Pears poached into calm. Plums laid on rushes to shrivel into sweetness. Herbs hung from beams like green punctuation. Salt is a treasure that behaves like a tool. It persuades meat to practice patience. Bacon in rafters, hams wrapped and proud. Fish is kindness if you live near water, discipline if you do not. For some, a barrel from the coast arrives with its sea still in it. For others, Fridays and fast days become a theology of vegetables. On ordinary days, the pot rules. Pottage is democracy. Whatever the garden and the larder can agree upon, married in broth. Barley, oats, a handful of lentils that remember to be cheap. A heel of bacon making its last good argument. Greens that need eating. A bone with secrets. The pot sighs all day and feeds everyone by evening. The wooden ladle knows whom to visit first without being told. Salt is measured by a pinch whose accuracy comes from repetition. Pepper, cinnamon, saffron luxuries visit grand tables, and special feasts remind the tongue that the world is larger than the parish. Then they go away and leave behind the more enduring savor of time well cooked. Tools are few and sure. A knife with a good temper. A mortar that teaches how flavors wake under the pestle. A baked stone for hearth cakes. A brass pot that blackens beautifully and cleans again with sand and a will. A wooden bowl that holds stories and shadows. A spoon smoothed by 100 careful washings. Iron hooks keep kettles where fire can reach them without starting a quarrel. Trivets teach bread how to rest. The floor is strewn with rushes and herbs that remember summer. Sweet flag, mint, meadowsweet. When they are changed, the room sighs and agrees to begin again. Eating is not only hunger's answer. It is a ceremony of enough. Hands wash in a shared bowl. The youngest sits where someone can cut his meat. Heads bow. The lord at a high table, or the reeve at a trestle, or the shepherd on a doorstep, each has the same thought in a differently sized cup. Grant us this day our daily bread. Talk starts low, rises with the second ladle, loosens with the cup. News folds itself around steam. A guest is given the better portion not because someone can spare it, but because someone has decided to be the kind of household that always can. After, there is the honest business of putting the world away. Dishes are scraped, ale pegs turned, embers banked. In some houses, a charm is murmured against accidental fire. In others, a cover is slid across the hearth and named curfew cover a few the night's permission to rest. A candle pinches out with wetted fingers. A rushlight is set in a clip to mind the dog if someone must rise. The kitchen's heart glows low and red and remembers what to do in the morning. Not all cooking happens at home. In towns, the cookshop gathers those who live where fire is a luxury or time a poorer friend. Trenchers arrive with meat pies whose lids release a private weather. Eel pasties that taste of river and pepper and a good mood. Hot broth for a man who has counted coins all day and would rather count swallows in the eaves. A wafer walks the lanes with a small iron, pouring batter and pressing it into thin, sweet maps. A child follows and trades a song for a bite, and it seems fair to both to the other end of appetite. Feasts do their careful work. In a hall hung with branches of green on holy days, service looks like theatre and behaves like gratitude. Dishes come in processions. The carver's knife signs its practice script in the air. Subtlety sugar sculpted into a castle, a ship. A saint makes children widen their eyes, and adults remember that delight is a virtue. Courses are parted by hand-washing with scented water, by music that understands the room, by talk that bends toward blessing. Leftovers are not a problem to be solved. They are a plan, sent to the almonry, to the poor at the gate, to the traveller who arrived late and hopes for mercy. Even excess is taught manners. Hunger is known too. In thin years, kitchens become councils. Loaves are made smaller rather than fewer so that everyone can hold a piece of hope. Ale is watered and named small without shame. Herbs stretch what meat there is. Onions do what onions always do, stand between want and despair with their sharp sweetness. The parish priest knows who has nothing. The reeve knows who has something. Between them a barrel moves. A sack of grain arrives at a door at dusk. A hand collects a bowl and pretends it is returning it. Survival here is communal, and the hearth is where that decision is renewed nightly. Smell is memory's index. Bread and alder smoke, whitwool and thyme, ale and apples, iron and soap, washing day lie, and a sudden lemon brought from far away that makes the whole room feel like it has learned a new word. Textures too. The rough linen of a towel, the polished haft of a knife, the peel's worn edge, the table's honest scars. Light is a utensil. The lancet windows beam at noon, the candles lake at dusk, the oven's brief sunrise when the door is opened. You could blindfold a person who has lived here and they would still be able to tell you what season the kitchen believes in. By night, the hearth sleeps without sulking. A pot soaks. The cat sits where warmth lingers and becomes part of the floor. A wooden cup, turned on a neighbor's lathe, rests on its side like a moon. The last task is always small and precise. Setting a bowl over grain against mice. Hanging a ladle where a hand will find it without looking. Whispering to a child that there will be porridge in the morning, and the child believing it. The room darkens carefully. The house approves. If you listen across a kingdom from cottages and town ovens, from castle kitchens and abbey bakehouses, you hear a low chorus doing the same work in different keys, turning hunger into meals, turning raw into ready, turning scarce into shared. No chronicler will list the names of those who kept the fires fed and the dough honest, yet the age stands on their accuracy. Empires are cooked before they are crowned. Tomorrow will repeat itself, not in boredom, but in promise. A hand will test the dough, a peel will lift, a barrel will settle, a knife will find its balance in the air and then in bread. A mouth will bless without being asked. The hearth will add its line to the long poem you write's quiet, useful kind. Clothing is a quiet promise. We will keep one another warm. In medieval Europe, that promise began long before a needle touched thread. It began on hillsides where sheep were the color of weather, along rivers where flax lay in water learning to be linen, in gardens where plants kept the secret of color in their roots and leaves. If you listen closely, you can hear a kingdom dressing itself not in hurry, but in patience, thread by steady thread. Spring starts the long work with a soft bleat and a careful hand. Shearing is not a rush of wool. It is a conversation between blade and fleece. A shepherd draws a ewe close, speaks to her without words, and folds the shears like a tidy mouth closing around a sentence. The fleece comes off in a single, astonishing map of the animal. Children run fingers along the greasy curls and smell lanolin and field. The best locks are set aside, the rest sorted coarser for blankets, softer for what will live close to skin. Nothing is wasted. Even the sweepings find work later, stuffing a warming pad for cold feet. Wool is a cloud that must learn discipline. Women and men too. Where work asks, wash the fleece in warm water that forgets itself into grease and dirt. On a line, the locks hang like seaweed in a friendly wind. When they dry, combs and cards begin their catechism. Iron teeth or teasel heads soft and stubborn pull the hairs into order. Align the fibers so that a thread can be persuaded to exist. A distaff is dressed. A spindle is set to spinning. Fingers do a small dance that never learns to show off. Twist, pinch, draw, twist, pinch, draw. The spindle drops and is caught. The well hums. The thread lengthens. A song begins because hands like rhythm, and rhythm helps the thread remember to be even. In the evening, distaffs gather like a grove. Spinning is a social quiet stories told around a small pond of light. Babies dozing in laps. Someone's old dog testing different places to sleep. The thread grows in skeins. Skeins become bundles. Bundles wait like polite guests for the loom. In another corner of the room, flax fibers, linens, shy preface have their own long story. Seeds sown in fine tilth. Stems pulled, not cut, to keep the fibers long. Retting in water where patient rot loosens bark from treasure. Drying on a fence, scratching with a wooden blade. Haggling through combs until the line is glossy as river hair. Linen is clean even before it is woven. It remembers you. The loom has a voice you can recognize in your sleep. Warp threads are wound like a harp that will play a cloth. Hair doors lift and lower. A shuttle runs a small bird made of wood carrying weft left to right, right to left. Regular as breath, the beater brings the pick home with a sound that is never rude. Cloth grows the way gardens do. You look away and then back and realize something has lengthened. Weavers count without numbers by the lift of the foot, by the feel in the arm, by the pattern a draft makes in the wrist. Patterns have names that sound like advice. Tabby, twill, herringbone. A good loom sheds worry the way a head sheds rain. Not all good work is quiet. Fulling mills tamp a river's strength into new cloth. If you follow the stream beyond the miller's wheel, you may hear the thud of wooden hammers, driven by water, pounding warmth and strength into the web. Fulling felts the wool, tightens it, persuades it to become weather's friend. In smaller places, feet do the job, men or women, in a trough, stepping out a tune that the town learns to hum. The wet fabric smells of sheep and stream and something like courage. After, the cloth is stretched on tenter frames in the open air, hooked at the edges, drying to its proper truth. One tenter hooks becomes a phrase for waiting, but here it is simply the patient hour between wet and ready. Color starts as a plant and a hope. In the dyer's yard, vats are little cauldrons of weather. Woad leaves are crushed and steeped. The liquor ferments. A vat turns to a low greenish promise. Cloth goes in pale and comes out a yellow that will blue only when the air kisses it, a chemical sky taught to live in wool. Madder's red hides in roots. Wilt holds sunlight in stalk and leaf. Walnut shells keep the memory of bark. Oak galls, when boiled and joined to iron, write letters and also dye. Alum bought dear mordants, which is to say it persuades colour. To mean it, an apprentice learns that dyes are not merely hues, they are tempi. Time and temperature compose the song. Folds of cloth appear in markets like calm rivers rolled up. The draper lifts a corner and lets it fall to show the weight. A buyer pinches, rubs, guesses the winter contained in the fold. Gilt seals little. Lead badges pressed on the edge say plainly who made this and where. A modest pride that keeps cheating rare. A merchant's pack carries a county to a fair to shires away. Another pack carries a nation to Bruges or Ghent to be watched by Flemish eyes that know cloth the way millers know water. A boy who has never left his parish learns to say scarlet, my Neva, marry. And his mouth begins to understand that colour is a language with social grammar. Tailors measure with string and experience. A kirtle is cut so it will be a friend. Hose are pieced from bias so they will bend like legs. A hood chaperone when it grows proud begins humble and ends as a wind's equal. Buttons are little rounds of horn or cloth. Laces are leather or linen cords that stand in for the miracles of fitted seams unimagined and therefore unmissed. Patches are not shame, they are biography. A sleeve tells to years of work. A cuff remembers harvest. A knee shows where a child learned to fall and stand up again. Dye fades with decency and leaves garments in a conversation with weather. Some churros hum in the background, trying to teach people their places with rules about furs and linings and the brightness permitted to different pockets. The laws are obeyed and ignored in equal portions. Markets are polite about it. A washerwoman who loves a strip of madder red will find a way to have it. A clerk who longs for blue will manage a woad cap even if his sleeves stay sensible. Sunday best is honest compromise. Decent, clean, aspiring a little. Weddings bloom with ribbons. Funerals fold themselves into sober cloth that holds a shoulder without argument. Linny makes a different music. Under everything, noble or plain, there is a shirt or shift white as snow would like to be. Linen keeps skin and all particular friends. It washes well. It dries like the memory of cloud. It is hemmed with small stitches on evenings when someone tells a story and someone else listens and both forget time. Beds are a gift of linen sheets crisp in winter, softer in summer. The smell a mix of air and river and sun. A mother folds a stack and feels richer than a goldsmith, and in a way she is. Work and weather decide fashion more honestly than any court. In the field, sleeves tie up out of the way. In the town, sleeves remind you that ink stains and you should be careful. In winter, layers are the common sense of survival. Chemise, kirtle, gown, cloak. In rain, a cloak becomes a small roof you can wear, and hats become small roofs you can love. Fur, where it is possible, lines, cuffs, and collars. Where it is not, wool learns to be clever. Felting is a secret friend. Boots that defy wet, hats that let snow fall where it likes dot in the dyer's lane. Colour is the town's breath. Woad, the shy green that becomes blue. Matters brick and rose. Weld straw bright. The browns and blacks of bark and iron that make modesty handsome. The vats steam on cold mornings, and the steam smells ferny and mineral and faintly of fruit. The dyer's hands keep a biography no soap can erase. Children pass and try to close their noses, and then open them again because the air is interesting. The dyer, patient, watches the color change and decides when enough has arrived today. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. Art without boasting, cloth talks of travel even when it stays home. A coarse blanket woven in the upland streams of a sheep's hold. A fine twill woven near a river finds itself on a cart headed for a fair, and then on another cart bound for a port. Somewhere, a seal is pressed into a lead disc. Somewhere else, a clerk cuts a strip from the end and keeps it in a book to prove later that the bolt promised and the bolt delivered were cousins. Trade is trust bound by thread. In quiet rooms, mending is a theology. A tear is not a reason to discard. It is a chance to keep faith with a garment that has kept faith with you. Darning exit in socks like small moons. A needle follows a path that makes new cloth on the old. A mother shows a child how to turn a heel without tangling. A grandfather two-eyes a thong to a shoe and says, "There," and a walk that would have been short becomes long enough. Clothes are family. They pass down, across, around. A shutter chest smells of wool and cedar and the faint ghost of lavender. From last summer's bundles at tea fairs. Bolts stand like quietly pleased trees. Drapers talk in a language woven tightly. Ells, nails, grades of fineness. Places where sheep are as much a crop as wheat. There is haggling that feels more like courtship than argument. Coins move and do not clatter rudely. A seamstress buys a remnant for a baby yet unborn. A boy lifts a corner of velvet he cannot afford and feels his hand learn a new softness. The world feels larger. The hearth will be warmer for it. Night comes, and the day's cloth rests. Loops on tender frames stop straining and become just loops in the dusk. A loom is covered with a cloth to keep dust off tomorrow's first pick. The dyer draws lids over his vats as if putting beasts to bed. A tailor lays shears on a folded gown with the respect he would give a book. Spindles sleep in baskets, little planets with their own gravity. A shirt hangs by the fire and finishes becoming something you can put on in morning light. What does clothing mean here? It means work made visible, warmth made portable, color tamed long enough to walk through a winter street, wealth that can be shared and repaired and measured in comfort rather than coin. It means a sheep's ear, a river's patience, a garden's secret, a hand's intelligence, all agreeing to be kind to a body. Tomorrow the flock will lift its heads again. Flax will drink in ditches. Combs will sing. The shuttle will run. Thats will steam. Tenterhooks will wait. Needles will find small moons in socks and make them whole. And a person will fasten a cloak at the throat, feel the weight and the mercy of it, and step into weather that is not an enemy because someone's has been faithful. Healing in the Middle Ages did not come with sirens. It came with footsteps on flagstones, with the soft clink of files, with a kettle's patient breath. Care was a habit rather than an event practiced in cloisters and kitchens, in apothecaries that smelled of honey and vinegar, in hospitals whose doors learned the weight of the weary. Illness had 1,000 names. Comfort had a few reliable shapes. Clean linen, warm broth, prayer spoken without hurry, and hands that knew what to do. When the body asks for gentleness, mourning begins in a place that has always preferred whispers, the infirmary of a monastery. A brother lifts shutters one by one. Light pools across beds lined in simple order. On a shelf, small bottles keep their colors, greens drawn from rue and fennel, golds from chamomile, browns from bark and wine. The herb garden outside provides the grammar for every remedy. Sage for the throat that has forgotten how to be brave, mint for a churning belly, plantain leaves for the small angers a day inflicts on skin. The infirmarian moves slowly, not because he is unsure, but because nothing resents haste so much as pain. He warms a cloth, checks a pulse with 2 fingers, folds a coverlet where a foot rests. Healing here is partly temperature and partly attention. Across town, an apothecary unlatches his shutters. The room greets you with a bright, precise perfume, dried lavender and thyme in sacks, fennel and anise in drawers, caraway in a jar stoppered with wax, vinegar that remembers apples, honey that remembers bees. Mortar and pestle begin their work, persuading seeds to give up their strength. On the counter sits a leech book recipes, copied by a careful hand. For a cough, thyme in wine. For weariness, a little rosemary steeped. For a wound, boiled water cooled and linen clean. The apothecary neither promises nor boasts. He measures, labels, and explains in sentences that have grown smooth from use. There is a midwife who has seen more midnights than most bells. Her hands know 2 languages at once, one for the mother, one for the child. She gathers warm water, ties her hair, tells a joke when a room grows too stern. The household breathes with her. When the baby arrives, pink and outraged at the cold, she smiles as if greeting an old friend. She knows the herbs that help milk let down, the teas that nudge rest toward a woman who has earned it, the songs that shorten the length of a hard minute. In the ledger of a parish, her name is written seldom. In the mouths of mothers often, on certain mornings, a barber surgeon sets out his bench under a sign of a red and white pole. His work is practical, a tooth that will not be argued with, a boil that has demanded decision, a cup that needs neatness more than poetry. His knives are clean, his bowl bright, his thread strong. He lives at the useful edge where craft meets courage. If you ask about humour's blood, phlegm, black and yellow bile, he will talk as long as you like. If you ask whether you should rest, he will say yes and pour broth in a cup, as if he had invented broth for you personally. The great hospitals do not resemble today's more cloister than clinic, more hostel than ward, yet they are genuine houses of mercy. At the hospital of St. John by the bridge, a sister washes a traveller's feet. A brother scrubs a floor until you can smell the idea of clean. Beds are close, but linen is crisp. A steward tallies bread, cheese, and ale with the honesty that keeps generosity from failing. On a shelf near the door sits a small carved box for alms. Coins arrive like rain, not enough to fill a well, enough to water a garden. In the evening, a chaplain's voice carries a psalm to those who cannot rise and to those who cannot sleep. No one here confuses care with miracle. No one here confuses lack of miracle with lack of care. Hygiene is a craft, not a theory. Water is heated for washing. The rich build stew houses where steam unties knots in shoulders. The poor make do with basins and kindness. Saturday becomes the day when hair learns manners. Linen that virtue's fabric keeps skin and wool from becoming unfriendly. In a town that prides itself on order, gutters run, floors are strewn with sweet herbs, and windows are unlatched to let air practice being new. These are not luxuries, they are preventions, small fences placed where trouble likes to wander. Food is medicine that people do not argue with. Broths whisper strength back into those who last eat chicken when there is a chicken to spare. Barley and leeks when there is not. Posets milk warmed with ale or wine, kissed with a little spice if fortune allows carries sleep to a place that forgot the road. In winter, syllabubs dream of spring. In summer, herb potages help the stomach keep pace with the sun. A regiment sanitatis, a simple guide, makes its quiet rounds. Rise with the light, move the body at honest speeds, eat according to the season. Keep anger on a leash. Sleep where air can find you, when illness grows large, when plague walks the lanes and writes its hard script across doorposts. Care shifts its shape, but not its heart. Processions ask heaven to remember mercy. Friars carry oil and consolation. Neighbors leave bread at thresholds and do not wait for thanks. Fear is a real creature. So is fidelity. The chronicle will remember numbers. The street remembers names. Years later, a child will learn to spell by copying a list of those the parish last, and will notice that some letters blur where tears once fell on ink. Knowledge travels as steadily as pilgrims. An itinerant physician comes with a little chest and a big book. He shows a steward how to boil bandages and a housewife how to steep fennel for wind. In a monastery scriptorium, a brother copies a chapter on fevers into a manual already fat with advice about gardens and beasts. A merchant returning from places where Arabic is the language of scholars brings a translation of a Persian treatise. A clerk learns the word syrup and says it aloud as if tasting it. The world's remedies breed together in time, and a town's cupboard grows wiser. At home, care wears an apron and an ordinary face. A mother lays a cool cloth across a child's head. A grandfather rubs a sore knee with a salve that smells of rosemary and lard. A neighbor sits a night by a bed so a wife can sleep 2 hours without listening for a cough. A priest brings communion and leaves behind a morsel of quiet. Prayer does not compete with poultice. Both are offered as if the body and spirit had agreed to be friends for the duration. Not every story ends with cure. Most end with company. When someone's measure is up, the rites are simple and exact. Candlesticks placed, prayers said, hands folded by hands that have done this before. A bell takes the news down the street without gossip. The grave is neat. The loaf and cup afterward are modest. The words said in the doorway are ordinary and therefore medicinal. Those who remain go home slower than they came. They look at roofs and hedges and decide to be kind to them for a while. Between illnesses, prevention is the kingdom's best physician. Wells are kept honest. Cows are grazed where water won't sulk. Meat is sorted carefully. Fish is eaten fresh where rivers permit. Small beer is brewed for ordinary thirsts. Windows are cracked even in cold weather. Mattresses are beaten. Linens aired. Floors swept. Chimneys soothed into efficiency. Children are told to wash their hands and then told again. The town writes rules about refuse, and then citizens learn, slowly, to follow them because no one likes the smell of negligence. When night gathers, care does not clock out. The infirmary checks a pulse once more. The apothecary covers his jars. The midwife dozes in a chair by a hearth where a new mother sleeps. The barber surgeon boils his instruments because heat is a sermon few argue with. At the hospital, a sister recites complaints softly so the syllables fall like cool water. Somewhere a cat decides to keep the nightwood orderly by inspecting each bed. The world, even in its fevers, agrees to gentleness for a few hours. What did healing mean then? It meant steadiness, the long patience of herbs and hands. It meant cleanliness where possible, good sense where proved, prayer where asked, presence everywhere. It meant that even when the body could not be persuaded, dignity could. Fresh linen, combed hair, a tidy pillow, a name spoken correctly, a door that opened when the weak knocked. It meant that a community chose, again and again, to be a place where suffering would not be left alone tomorrow. The garden will make more green promises. Water will warm. Bandages will dry on a line like small flags of hope. A novice will copy a remedy with a tongue between his teeth and make fewer mistakes than yesterday. The apothecary will grind. The midwife will measure. The barber surgeon will fold his cloths. And somewhere a mother will say to a child with a skinned knee, "Hush now," and then laugh, and the knee will obey. Civilizations are steadied by things that do not raise their voices, a beam that holds, a hinge that does not complain, a stone that agrees to become an arch. In medieval Europe, the craftsmen who coaxed these obediences from matter worked in hours measured by light, in shops perfumed by oak and iron, under rafters that remembered rain. You can walk through a town and not see them. You can live in one and owe them everything. Morning steals into the carpenter's yard before anyone asks it to. Two beads on the plane's iron. The adze handle is cool as river shade. Timber lies. Stack the way sentences lie stacked in a good book, sorted, seasoned, ready to say what they must. Oak with its patient grain. Ash that forgives shock. Elm that resists splitting. Beech that likes to be turned. You with secrets. A chalk line snaps a bright, brief horizon across a plank. A square kisses a corner and approves. The carpenter sets a saw with teeth he knows by heart. The first cut is not loud. It is honest. Joints are the craft's quiet grammar. A mortise waits for a tenon with the propriety of a door awaiting a friend who is never late. Dovetails think in diagonals and hold for generations without boasting. Pegs of seasoned oak are tapped through drawboard holes until they put two pieces tight with a strength that is almost affection. The mallet's rhythm is the workshop's psalm. Thrum, answer. Thrum, answer. A bench holds a brace and bit. A set of chisels, a marking gauge polished by thumb. When shavings lift from a long pass with the plain curled ribbons thin as onion. Skin the room smells of bread that once was tree. Next door, a turner leans over his treadle lathe. Foot pumping, hands guiding. He coaxes a chair leg out of a spinning blur. Beads and cobes appear as if the wood knew it all along and only needed reminding. Bowls bloom from blocks, their rims thinned until light can be seen talking through them. A child would swear a lathe is a spell. The turner calls it repetition with care. He rubs the finished piece with linseed and beeswax until it feels like something you could tell the truth to. Further down the lane, the cooper's hoops hang like moons. Staves tapered, beveled, shaped so that emptiness becomes a vessel learn to stand shoulder to shoulder. Fire warms a ring of oak. Iron hoops are driven down with measured blows. Steam rises, oak sighs, and the barrel remembers rivers it has not yet met. Air will be happier because of this geometry. Grain will keep its promise. Fish will travel without telling the road their story. The cooper listens for leaks with an ear that could hear a lie fall out of a bad stave at 20 paces. Iron wakes. In heat, the smith's forge clears its throat. Bellows breathe. Charcoal moves from black to orange to the color of difficult fruit. Tongs hold. The hammer speaks. Tap for truth. Strike for shape. Quench for temper. Back to heat. Repeat. A plowshare brightens into usefulness. A hinge closes its mind to failure. A knife gains an edge that will be kind to bread. Sometimes the smith draws wire. Sometimes he upsets a par. Sometimes he welds without naming it, hammering two heats into one metal that will not admit it was ever separate. The anvil's song carries out into the lane, and a dot goes to sleep with that music in its ear. You might think the mason's shop is silent, but stone has conversations if you know how to listen. Rough blocks lie stacked, limestone that smacks like bread when struck, sandstone that powders under a careless hand, granite that keeps its opinions. A mallet and a set of chisels do what rain and frost do over centuries, but with intention. Pitching of waste, dressing faces, setting a rise as crisp as new dawn. Templates in thin board trace arches, tracery, mullions that will someday teach light to be articulate. On the banker, the mason's bench, a block slowly confesses its true shape. A string dipped in red marks the line that must not be crossed. The mason honors it like a vow. Arches are arguments with gravity that conclude in friendship. Wedges the voussoirs lean toward a keystone that turns indecision into yes. Scaffolds creak. A treadwheel crane lifts slow as forgiveness. Ropes talk in twisted tongues. The master mason sights along a plumb and smiles with the corner of his mouth. When the centering is struck and the stones refuse to fall, the world claps without hands. A new space has learned to stand up. Glaziers make daylight into scripture. Lead cames wait in world coils. Panes of pot metal glass bone-colored are cut with a hot iron and a confident wrist. Blue that came on a pack animal from far hills. Red that was earned with copper and patience. Green that forgives mistakes. A cartoon full-size drawing lies beneath the bench. The panel grows over it like memory over a story told often. When the last solder cools and the panel is lifted to daylight, the room stops breathing for a moment and then remembers how. Roofers speak a language of rain. Thatch is combed and dressed. Reed laid with a pitch that will persuade water to walk down and away. Pegs and sways hold it in the wind's negotiations, where stone or fired clay tiles are used. Each is hung on a lath with a precise overlap, and the ridge is capped with a smile. In a good year, no one notices roofers except two. Not in a bad year. Everyone learns their names in a hurry. The best roofs are like good manners. They do their work by not calling attention to themselves. Leather workers scent the lane whether you want them to or not. Tanners, outside the wall near moving water, turn hides into trust, soaking, liming. Deherring, soaking again, then into vats with tannins from oak or chestnut. Time does what no tool can. The currier then oils and stretches, persuading stiffness into cooperation. From these sheets come shoes that behave as if born for a particular pair of feet, belts that carry quiet authority, bottles that hold without spilling, book covers that will make a text feel safe. Text on parchment needs letters and lines. A stationer lays quires in piles that smell faintly of animal and rain. The bookbinder sews gatherings over cords, pulls the thread with a smart snap, glues, presses, covers in wooden boards and leather, then sets brass corners and clasps that will hold a century shut and then open it again for the next pair of hands. A knife trims, a folder creases. A bone polishes edges until they feel finished as prayer. Instruments measure what eyes cannot. A wright sets out a cart's geometry on the floor and charcoal the dish of the wheel, the swing of the axle, the cant of the chaff so that road and load can make peace. Spokes are wedged into a nave. The felloe that outer rim is heated. Iron that shrinks onto wood and makes it one. The first turn tells whether the circle has learned to be a circle. If it hasn't, the wright can smell the error. He corrects without commentary. Water is a workman. Mills take its temper and give back flour, cloth, paper in later. Lucky it hounds. The millwright lays out gears with dividers and chalk. Lantern pinions marry big wheels with grace. Sluices teach river to be reasonable. When the wheel turns truly, everything else in the building learns confidence. A mill that runs smooth can keep a parish fed in a thin spring and becomes, without ceremony, a kind of Saint Dot in city corners. Gold and silver learn to be delicate without being weak. The goldsmith anneals heat and rest. Heat and rest then draws wire through a plate with holes that shrink like a patient lesson. Filigree happens under eyes that have practiced not blinking. Enamel sets glass in gold and calls it flour. Leaf beast. A ring that fits and never pinches is a form of mercy. A brooch that fastens without tearing cloth has moral character. The guild will test alloys, weights, touch marks, and in testing, protect the town from insult. Beauty is expected. To be honest, tools themselves are beloved citizens. A plane can be passed from hand to hand across 3 lifetimes and learn each grip. A hammer develops a mind favoring the left, falling true when you are tired because it knows the job must still be done. Chisels keep edge and lose it and learn it again under the oilstone that smells like rain. A shop where tools are cared for feels like a chapel that doesn't mind sawdust. Learning runs along benches. A master says little and shows much. Do it again is both critique and blessing. The apprentice who spends a morning sharpening rather than cutting is not being punished. He is being told the future. Stance, breath, angle, these are small courtesies the body pays to material so that the material will be polite in return. A boy's first dovetail gapes. The 5th holds. The 50th looks like 2 pieces of wood deciding they were always 1 dot at noon. People eat, because work that doesn't stop to honor food becomes careless. A bench on a wall warms the back. Bread tastes of the morning's fire. Cheese cuts clean. Ale minds its manners. Talk is inventory, small and sufficient. Whose hinge did not squeal, whose chisel wandered and was persuaded back, whose roof turned rain into a lesson rather than a complaint. Someone tells a story about a saint who smooths his rough day with a prayer. Someone else answers with a detail about a screw he cannot yet make but wants to understand. No one hurries back inside. The bell will call. Afternoon quiet is a different animal than morning quiet. It has more memory. The carpenter sets a frame, pins it, lifts it with neighbors who arrive not because they were asked, but because the tilt of a skeleton demands hands. The beam finds its socket. The house grows a shoulder. People stand back and see it. The shape of shelter newly agreed upon. There's a soft cheer, not because anyone is grand, but because a day has been useful. Toward evening, shops put away their voices. Shavings are swept into a bin fuel for tomorrow's cookfire. The forge is banked under ash and will remember how to wake. The stone chips are shoveled, the bank are cleared, the mallet laid so the handle will not warp. The cooper checks hoops one last time. The turner oils his late ways. The glazier covers panels against dust. The goldsmith closes the little chest where honesty sleeps. Doors lean into their frames. Latches lift and fall. The lane grows less talkative on feast days. Craft becomes ceremony. Guilds process with candles and modest banners, emblems stitched into cloth by hands that know how to count threads. St. Joseph for the carpenters. St. Eligius for the smiths and goldsmiths. St. Dunstan where his legend fits. The air smells of beeswax and wool. Work is blessed, not as an exception to prayer, but as one of its languages. Masters walk beside apprentices and look larger because of it. Apprentices walk with spines that have learned honesty. The town watching feels safer in its beams and hinges, its bridges and bells. Failures happen. A beam checks, a glaze cracks, a wall settles and tells you about it. Craftsmen do not make speeches. They make lists. The repair is done before complaint. Confine its shoes. When judgment must be passed on a bad batch of tiles, a barrel that leaks, a lock that cheats, guild elders consider, correct, and forgive with terms that remember the person inside the error. Standards without cruelty make a community that lasts. Seasons write their edits. Winter shortens the shop and lengthens the bench where plans are drawn. A new roof screen with tracery like vines in patient frost. A bridge that will stop the river from winning every argument. A chest whose lid will not warp in a crowded room. Spring wets timber that should stay dry, and dries ground that should stay wet. Men and women make adjustments as if changing the key of a song. Summer scatters light across shops like coins on a fair table. Autumn draws it in and leaves the edges gold-dotted tonight. A town becomes a museum of craft that has no closing hour. Doors hang straight. Thresholds lift feet into rooms where soup remembers the garden. Chairs hold tired backs. Stairs talk politely under weight. Windows keep out wet and let in what morning will bring. Bridges trust their own ideas. Fountains argue cheerfully with gravity in a grammar invented by masons. Bells hang in frames that swing and sing because Woodman and Smith decided to be friends with physics. The hand of every maker passes over you, briefly and kindly, every time you move. What is made matters less than how it is made. With attention, with proportion, with materials allowed to speak in their own accents. The carpenter respects oak's patience. The smith understands that iron is temperamental but loyal. The mason knows stone will tell you its plan if you listen with a chisel. The town reaps the harvest of these courtesies, safety, usefulness, a beauty that is never brittle. Tomorrow will repeat itself, as good days do. Chalk lines will snap, bellows will breathe, water wheels will wink, shavings will curl, sparks will rise and die like brief constellations. Dust will settle and be swept into usefulness. A new apprentice will think he is unimportant and be wrong. An old master will think he is done learning and be corrected by oak or iron or stone. The world will be steadied again by quiet strengths, and when you lie down to sleep, you can trust, without thinking, the beam above you, the latch beside you, the stair below you, the street beyond you, the bridge down the road, the tower that points at a sky you share with the dead who taught you how to hold a tool. That trust is the lullaby the makers give. It will last the night. Childhood in the Middle Ages was not a pause, it was a path. It began in the small kingdom of a household under a roof that knew everyone's breath, beside a hearth that measured time in embers, and it lengthened quietly toward the fields. The shop, the choir stall, the road. If you listen for it, you can hear an age raising its children with the gentlest arithmetic. One task, one song, one hand shown how to hold a tool. Repeat. A baby is born into a room that has practiced welcome. Water warms in a pot. Linen airs by the fire. A midwife's voice keeps panic from remembering its lines. Someone hangs a sprig of green near the bed box or rosemary because hope likes an emblem. When the first cry arrives, it sounds like a bell rung once in a church that no one knew was open. The child is swaddled, then freed, then swaddled again, then given to the mother whose face becomes the first geography. Milk is the first lesson. Sleep the second, being held, the third, a lullaby half prayer, half where the report makes its circle again and again, until the night remembers that it can be kind. In the first years, the house is an academy with low benches. A spoon is the first instrument. A wooden cup becomes a drum, a hat, a boat, a measure. Small hands travel the table's scarred landscape ridges once smoothed by bread and elbows. The floor is strewn with rushes and sweet herbs. Toys are improvised. A rag doll with a contented face. A carved horse that knows only one gait and learns a second in a child's imagination. A hoop that finds a straight lane and teaches legs how to chase without falling. A father lifts a toddler to the window to meet the morning. A mother shows how to pat dough and not let it escape. Older brothers and sisters provide the best curriculum. This is how a hen is stroked without ruffling. This is how a dog hears the word no when there is bacon in your hand. This is how you carry water if you are small, twice as many trips, half as much spilling. Outside, the village is a playground with rules that no one had to write. Children race along the lane until the corner, not the one past. The smithy, hop a narrow stream and name it a sea. Climb a low wall and become kings. Invent an army that conquers a turnip bed and then retires in good order to a fence rail to share a crust. Games are old enough to have forgotten their inventors. Knucklebones, 9 men's moray scratched on a doorstep, tag renamed for saints whose feast days still ring in the year. Blind man's bluff with a scarf perfumed by a mother's cupboard, singing circles that soften hard mornings. The ball is leather or rags. The rules are a rumor. The happiness is accurate. Learning is not separate from labor. A daughter helps with carding wool and discovers that rhythm makes time obedient. A son tries to carry a bucket that the bucket does not agree to, then learns to take smaller sips from the well. The first stitches are crooked and proud. The first knots slip and then learn to hold. A child is trusted with a candle only when a hand has shown where the flame is friend and where it is full. Spring brings lambing and new words. Colostrum, shearing crook. Summer brings weeding and the notion that patience can be seen in rows. Autumn brings harvesting and the truth that work can be a parade. Winter brings the longest school. Mending, reciting, listening to stories told properly enough that a child keeps the plot safe until spring. Some children step from home into another kind of schooling. In the song school attached to a parish or cathedral. A boy and in places. A girl learns letters by tracing them with a finger in dust, then on slate, then inked on scraps of parchment, smoothed by someone's careful knife. The alphabet arrives as a chant. Latin syllables follow, shy at first, then bold. A schoolmaster's rod hands like thunder. Better teachers use it less than their voices. Psalms are copied into memory. Even those who never master grammar learn. Cadence and comfort. In winter, the room is cold, and the breath of many children makes the air foggy and sincere. In summer, a window is propped with a stick, and a bird tries to join the declensions. Other paths led to apprenticeship. A boy or girl stands before a guild master with a father's nod or a mother's bargain and offers years for skills. The bundle is small. A shirt, a prayer, a promise. The new apprentice sweeps before he saws, winds bobbins before she weaves, bellows before he hammers, watches before she tries. The shop is a little university with a curriculum of gestures. Measure twice, cut once, sharpen before you boast. Grain runs this way. He tells the truth if you listen. The first coin earned by a truly finished task is bright enough to make a child act older for a week. Then they return to their age and spend it on something sweet and forget to be solemn. In manor and castle, pages begin with manners and errands boots. To the right door, messages along stairs. A dog taught gentleness and grow into more. Writing lessons on palfreys that forgive. Reading letters for a lady who knows more French than the visitor. Serving a table with a civility that does not drop the trencher. Later, squires learn arms, but they also learn that leather dries if not coddled, that iron sulks if it goes to bed dirty, that a buckle is an impatient friend who breaks if hurried. A good household raises its children into virtues by trusting them with jobs that matter sooner than they expect. Girls' learning is larger than the narrow lists sometimes made for them. In cottages and halls, they memorize recipes that belong to seasons and families, which herbs after lambing, how to pull flax and lay it right, how to green a cheese rind with kindness rather than carelessness, how to cut a gown so the wearer does not fight it all day, how to keep a household ledger in a head framed by linen, how to look at a sky and say the washing should wait. Some learn letters in secret, others in daylight, with a father's pride or a mother's practical wish. A literate daughter can hold a market stall to account. In convents, girls learn chant that can make a stone room feel like a garden. In towns, they learn figures that can keep a shop honest. Church and calendar mark childhood's rises and rests. Baptism is a community's first embrace. Name days make a child feel like a door has opened just for them. At Candlemas, a little taper is guided in small fingers. At Palm Sunday, A frond becomes a ribbon and then a keepsake. On May Day, girls weave flowers into hair that is learning to be grown without losing its childhood. Corpus Christi brings processions that ask for careful steps and reward them with color and song. In many places, boy bishops and mock courts give children one day of harmless rule and teach adults the art of laughing without injury. The year enacts a childhood in miniature. Expectation, arrival, feast, fast, story, rest, illness, in a time before swift cures, teaches tenderness early. A child learns to fetch water without splashing, to cool a cloth and wring it with small strength, to sit for an hour with a friend who has no appetite and coax one spoon of broth into the world. Loss arrives sometimes and instructs without consent. A small grave is a town's hardest lesson. Even there, childhood teaches. The game pauses. The rude boy holds his tongue. A girl shares her doll. A priest remembers to speak the name correctly, slowly, twice. Care is a curriculum. Grief, for all its roughness, has tutors with soft voices. Feast days are childhood's favorites because adults agree to behave as if wonder has a legal right. At the fair, coins become small wishes granted. A painted whistle, a sweet, a ribbon, too bright for every day that will be hidden and brought out on saints' days. Performers fold jokes into lessons. A mystery play folds lessons into jokes. A child learns that all learning doesn't sit on a bench. It can stand on a wagon too. Under a painted canopy, galloping through Genesis in an afternoon, reading widens the path when it can. A primer with an epic as a doorway. A sorter whose letters stand like quiet trees. A bestiary with beasts drawn both wrongly and lovingly, these become friends. Where books are scarce, memory is the library. Rhymes that count geese and stars. Proverbs about patience and weather. Tales told on cold nights and told again in summer shade until their edges smooth. An old man's story about a saint who would not leave the hungry uncomforted becomes, in a child's mouth, a promise not to take the bigger share when trenches are passed. Ethics arrives disguised as entertainment. Play itself is useful practice. Balancing on a log is engineering for the body. Rolling a hoop is an introduction to momentum and persistence. Throwing a ball back and forth with utter seriousness is a rehearsal for trust. A laughing pile of children in the hay is a seminar in friendship and apology. They finish with scratches and straw in their hair and return to chores more willing. Adults, watching from doorways, pretend not to smile. There are rites that make the path visible. A first day helping at the mill, flour on your nose. The wheel's heavy hymn becoming your heartbeat. A first sale of market eggs counted without dropping or lying. Change returned without shame. A first candle held without spilling wax in the Corpus Christi procession, hands steady enough that the grown man behind you relaxes. A first confession, words offered into kindness and returned without judgment. A first time entrusted with a key. A first time asked to run alone in the lane at dusk and return before the bell, responsibility given like a small lamp and carried without dropping. Sometimes childhood ends sooner than anyone wishes. A father's death puts a boy at a bench. A mother's illness adds a loom to a girl's day. In such houses, adulthood arrives as a guest who did not wait to be invited. But even then, the town keeps a hand on a child's shoulder. A neighbor mends a fence without charging. The reeve looks the other way about a tithe for a month because hunger answers to no calendar. A priest finds work that can be done near home. Children are not asked to be saints. They are helped to be human. For many, the formal doorway to youth's end is marriage or mastery. A new master's masterpiece is presented: coffer, shoe, brooch, patch of cloth, and judged by elders whose faces know how to praise without breaking spines. The paper is sealed. The tools feel heavier and kinder. A wedding joins two apprenticeships. One in the art of keeping a household, another in the art of keeping a heart. The church hums with neighbor's breath. A loaf is broken and shared. Coins are thrown with prudence. A threshold is crossed with laughter that will be needed later. Night gathers, and children become asleep people, limbs given back to gravity. Mouths open in the particular honesty of rest. A mother or father, not yet ready for sleep, stands in the door and watches the next century practice peace. In that watching is the secret of medieval parenting. Not control, not indulgence, but companionship with the world's slow instruction. A child is shown how to tie a knot, to read a letter, to hold a handle, to step aside for a procession, to step forward when someone needs carrying. What did childhood mean then? It meant being apprenticed to belonging, to a family, a parish, a craft, a landscape. It meant that learning was not merely something you had, it was something you did. You did it at wells and looms, at stoves and in choirs, in fields and behind stores, in whispers and in laughter. It meant that tenderness could be as practical as a bowl of soup and as ambitious as a book copied for a child not yet born. Tomorrow morning will ring the bell again. A wooden horse will gallop, a primer will open, a spindle will hum, a bucket will be carried more steadily. A shop door will swing and a master will say, "Again good," with the kind of praise that makes wrists honest. A child will sleep 1 inch taller than last night, and no one will measure except the bench that holds the new height without complaint. Sleep now. Imagine small hands unclosing, a hoop leaning against a wall, a primer put face down to save its place, not that it can forget, and the soft chorus of breathing from beds set close as vowels. The world is teaching itself to continue. Childhood is how it remembers. Travel in the Middle Ages was not a sprint. It was a conversation between feet and earth, between weather and will, between the map in your head and the bells you could hear from the next town. The road began at a threshold that knew your shoes, and turned into a line that patience could follow. If you listen, you can hear the world loosening its distances, a gate unlatching, a bridge remembering how to hold, a ferry rope humming like a tuned string. Morning takes the first step. A pack is tied with the kind of knots that undo kindly at dusk. Bread is wrapped in cloth. A piece of cheese finds a corner. A flask is tested. A small knife proves its edge on a strip of leather. A family doorway becomes a ceremony without speeches. A hand to the shoulder, a blessing shaped like a smile. A last look at the roof that has always been persuasive in rain. Then the road accepts you, and your shadow begins its day-long lesson in keeping pace. Roads themselves vary like moods. Some are Roman bones straight and sure, still teaching a valley to be reasonable. Some are rutted lanes, the color of yesterday's weather. Some are green tracks that split around a stubborn oak and meet again as if nothing had happened. Here and there a causeway crosses a marsh with the authority of a good sentence. Milestones are rare. More common are the signs the body learns to trust. A spire pricked against the sky, smoke laid flat by a west wind, a wedge of geese taking the long, correct curve. Rivers are roads with opinions. Where a bridge stands, it is because a century collaborated. Piles pinned into stubborn riverbed, timbers joined. Toll house set like a punctuation mark at the far end. A bridgekeeper nods you through, and if your pack is honest and your face says you are not in the business of trouble, charges a price scaled to your feet. Where there is no bridge, a ford shows itself to eyes that know how to read, ripples that behave, stones that do not roll under courage, a shallowing of tone as water learns confidence. Fords are seasonal. Ferries are conversational. A ferryman pulls with steady arms and tells you, if you ask politely, which inn across the water will feed a stranger kindly, and which will remind you to watch your purse between places. The landscape tends the traveller. Hedgerows hold their own boundaries and lend you shade. Waycrosses stand where decisions must be made and practice being patient with indecision. A shrine in a niche shelters a candle stub and a sigh. Trees become landmarks of the sort that never learned maps but learned faces. A hill that looked impossible from below divides itself into steps when your feet actually meet it. Down the far side, your knees understand humility. The day arranges itself into markers more reliable than hours. Second loaf is not a time. It is a hunger that has agreed to be reasonable. Angelus is not only a prayer. It is also the bell that says the sun is where it should be. And you are too. Shadow length becomes a unit. 3 of your own feet 4. Early, 6 for noon, 9 for not worth hurrying. When a town sound begins to arrive dogs, a clatter that means wheels, a call you do not need to translate, you adjust your hope to the new scale of near. Traffic moves in chords. A peddler with a tray of needles and ribbons makes a road resemble a small shop. A tinker sings because singing weighs nothing. A pair of students bound for a cathedral school argues about grammar into languages and laughs in a third. A cart loaded with wool has a gate you can learn to pass or fall in with. A string of pack horses, each with bells like small opinions, steps with a courtesy that keeps ankles unbruised. A pilgrim, scallop shell on hat, walks the same speed as weather, and is in conversation with it all day. Inns are where roads fold themselves into rooms. Signs creak and tell stories. A white hart that looks more like a goat. A mermaid with a smile that forgives the painter's guesswork. A 3 tons where the ale is better than the paint. A bench remembers 100 backs and holds yours as if you were not the least of them. Bread arrives with the gravity of hospitality. Stew follows, making all the day's arithmetic simpler. If you have coins, the host counts them with the politeness that keeps friendships. If you do not, a small stable corner and a bowl appear anyway, because the road has its own economy, and it is not only silver. Saints and seasons manage the calendar of travel. In winter, daylight is stingy. You stop earlier and sit nearer the fire. In spring, fords pretend to be braver than they are. You learn to listen to the river's grammar before stepping into its sentence. Summer gives you space, but takes your water. Wells become old friends, and a bucket's rise is applause. Autumn is crisp and clear and full of fares that pull you of course with a logic the body understands music, color, cinnamon if you are lucky, woolen bales that smell like open hills. Rain is a character that arrives often and negotiates everything. A cloak becomes a roof, a hat becomes a room, safety is a craft. You walk with others when the lane learns to be lonely. Forest edges are passed with friendly attention to where the path leaves shadow. A staff is a third leg and a fourth idea. The road is not lawless so much as it is practical. Places that mind their bridges and bury their refuse give you a certain kind of confidence, and you pay it back by minding your manners and closing gates behind you. When night must be met outside, a wayside cross is a reasonable companion. A fire, small and minded. A story told to yourself if no one is near so that your mouth remembers you belong in company even when you do not have it. Messengers move like ideas with legs. A rural courier keeps a horse fresh at the next post and next. Leatherbacks buckle and are unbuckled. Seals are pressed so a road cannot change a sentence. Monasteries move news more quietly. A scrap of note folded with herbs. A parcel of seeds wrapped in a letter that asks for prayers for a cousin in a thin year. Letters of safe conduct are passports that weigh as much as the person who issued them. You keep them dry in a clever pocket and show them only when showing helps. Tolls are not insults. They are how bridges keep remembering how to hold. Rivers turn to highways where boats make good arguments against mud. Barges slide, confident in current and pole. Corks and hulks work the coast, their bellies full of rye or salt or the idea of far places. In tidal towns, rope becomes grammar. Cleated, looped, paid out, taken in. The smell of tar keeps weather at bay. Seamen read the mouth of a river the way ploughmen read a field. Tidal gates, sandbars, the way the wind borrows water to make short chop or lays it smooth when thinking of peace. On board, sleep is measured differently. Hammocks revise what the body thinks it knows about down. Wayfinding is an old human art that does not argue with tools. A compass, where a traveller has one, sits in a pocket like a modest judge. A star, where the sky is kind, takes the bench and needs no fee. Mostly you travel by stories. Turn where the ash splits into three. Keep the church to your left until a mile beyond the U. Cross the second bridge, not the first. Ask for the baker with the scar who will point with both hands and not charge you for the gesture. Your feet learn corrections the way a scribe learns to scrape a letter, without fuss, with gratitude oddity borders. The world tries on new accents. Bread looks familiar and then doesn't. A greeting shifts by a vowel and feels like a new friend you already trust. Weights and measures behave politely but differently. A pound in one place stands next to a livre in the next, and they agree not to quarrel. Fares serve as translators. A woman selling walnuts learns the numbers in 3 tongues by noon and spends them well by dusk. A boy says florin as if tasting it, then decides his penny is loyal enough for now. Monasteries and hospices are the road's conscience. A porter hears the way your boots speak and offers what will actually help. Water, bread, a place to dry your cloak. A straw bed under a roof that thinks kindly of drought and downpour. You are asked for nothing but a name so the prayers can find you. You give what you can. A story from 2 towns back. A warning about a washed-out ford. News that a certain reeve is honest this year. News travels by such braided courtesies. Night on the road is less dramatic than songs pretend. Under a hedge, if you must, with your cloak folded to make a hill for your head. In a barn with a farmer's leave, listening to cows argue gently with their dreams. In a common room under a signboard, where snars learn to harmonize and no one is judged. Stars are fair where smoke is not. An owl takes shifts with the watch. Your feet flattered, fed, of duty make peace with your legs. The last thing you hear is often a kettle deciding it has boiled enough. What does the road teach? Proportion, first of all. That a mile is less than a morning and more than a boast. Patience next. That a detour is sometimes the exact route. Reading not of books alone, but of bridges, faces, skies, bells. Gratitude, cheap and rich, for clean water, for honest bread, for a stable corner that keeps wind polite. Company, because a country is held together by strangers who did not remain so for long. In the morning, Distances contract. The spire that was an opinion becomes a building with a bell that knows your name. The inn that was a rumor teaches your hands a new way to hold a bowl. The road that was a line on your tongue becomes a story your feet recognize. You step into a gate. The gate keeps your arrival for a second on its hinge, and then forgets you, as gates should. Behind you, the road relaxes, glad it could help. Ahead of you, a market opens. A friend's door admits light. A chair invites. A jug learns your mouth. You could cross a kingdom like this by days that were honest and nights that behaved, and forget to tell anyone later that you did anything remarkable. But the road would correct you gently. You learned the country's grammar and did not break it. You practiced the common law of kindness, and it practiced you back. You carried news in both directions, and you set it down where it would feed someone. The map inside you is broader now. Your sleep will be better for it. When you lie down tonight, listen for the lane you left this morning becoming quiet behind you, for the ferry rope humming in your memory, for the bridge keeping its promise, for the bell of a town you no longer see striking the hour on your behalf. The world is large and accurate. You have moved in it with the politeness that earns rest. Let distance do the walking now. Morning knows the way. The Year in medieval Europe was a book the land wrote slowly, and every household learned to read it by heart. Pages turn not with clocks but with weather, soil, sap, birdsong, and the quiet grammar of tools. If you set your palm on a gate at dawn, you could feel the day already breathing cool, damp, and polite, a promise that the field would accept footprints and work without complaint. At the village edge, land lies in long strips, open fields braided by custom rather than fences. One strip sown in wheat, one in rye or barley, one left to rest under the soft camouflage of clover and weeds. The three-field system, a bargain with dirt that increases mercy. The fallow is not absence. It is recovery. Geese graze there and leave what fertility understands. Children chase them, shriek once, and then remember the rule: do not scatter the flock. Let grass do its slow arithmetic. Spring loosens the ground like a knot untied by rain. Plough teams lean into harness to oxen patient as winter, sometimes for the stubborn clods. The deep whispers over lighter soils. The heavier moldwood turns the earth with the authority of a good sentence, dark, damp, exact. Behind, a man scatters seed from his apron in a long practice swing. Wheat where bread will be serious, barley for ale, oats for beasts, and sometimes for bowls on thin mornings. A woman follows with a rake that teaches seeds to sleep under just enough cover. A boy keeps birds honest with a string and a rag that passes for a hawk. Over everything, larks stitching sky to field with thread you cannot see. Fences talk in hedges. Hawthorn and hazel are coaxed by coppice and laying into living walls that keep sheep loyal and winds polite. Hedgerows are pantries if you know how to look. Hips and haws, slows that pucker the mouth and then become cordial. Nests where eggs appear like punctuation marks in spring. In the orchard, gnarled apples remember grafts made by hands now sleeping. Pears lean into trellises like old men telling a joke. Bees keep court with blossom. The herb plot near the door is both kitchen and infirmary. Sage, thyme, savory, mint, parsley, bleak soldiering on through cold. Onions that store the sun's memory in their hearts. Summer fattens quietly. The meadow is a long, green sentence that ends in haymaking scythes sweeping in rhythm. Swathes folded, cocks raised, rakes pulling sunshine into tidy shapes. The air smells of sugar trying to become something steadier. Sweat is clean. A jug of small ale travels from hand to hand and returns empty without anyone asking whose turn it was to fill it. In the flax plot, blue flowers shiver like a rumor. Later, stems will be pulled, retted, broken, heckled linen's long conversion. In the bee skips, low humming becomes honey. Wax waits to be candle and letter and blessing. Dot in the field of barley. Horns comb the wind. In the field of wheat, ears tilt toward seriousness. Weather is both tutor and tyrant. Signs are watched without superstition. Swallows skimming low mean damp. A ring around the moon asks for patience with tomorrow's path. Brooks on the church yew facing north tell of a shy breeze that will change chore's order by afternoon. People speak about rain as if about a friend with moods. It means well. It lingers. It apologizes late. It forgets and then arrives all at once. Autumn draws the village into long, kind labor. Harvest begins early and ends when barns are opinionated with grain. Slates are set, blades whetted, grips bound. Men and women cut and bind. Children gather fallen heads. Elders sit on low stools and tie sheaves that can stand like soldiers and then like saints. Carts list homeward under a happiness that creaks. The church door wears a harvest loaf shaped like wheat. A procession folds along the lanes. Thanks are spoken with the same mouth that complained last week about the mud. And no one calls it hypocrisy, only human accuracy after the shocks. Cleaning opens the field to those who need it most. Widows and the old moving slowly with baskets. Finding kindness in the stubble. It is law and grace at once. Somewhere near the barn, a man with an elbow staff measures tithes neither grudgingly nor smugly. A portion goes to the almonry, to mouths not related by blood, and therefore related by mercy. In the mill, the wheel rehearses winter grain becomes flour. Flour becomes promises. The millstone's song is low and companionable. The miller's hand tests fineness with the expertise of a better class of diplomat. Winter is not idleness. It is other work. Hedges are laid, tools rehafted, plough beams mended, carts tightened against spring's rude roads. In byres, beasts steam like kettles. Muck is piled a future field in progress. Men bring logs from coppice. Women spin the year's warmth from last spring's fleeces. Children carry the small, steady cargo of kindling and news. On days when frost draws ferns on leaded panes, threshing makes grain step out of its straw with flails that keep time like old music. Winnowing lets the wind to the delicate part. A loaf eaten hot is improper. Eaten warm, it is a holiday. Tools are few and moral. A spade breaks soil like an argument that ends well. A hoe writes neat corrections between rows. A sickle is a grammar for wrists. A scythe is prosody for the whole body, hips, shoulders, breath. A harrow is a broom the earth likes. A riddle tells truth from chaff. A bushel measures enough. Every handle glassed by palms. Every edge that holds is thanked with oil and a dry corner to sleep in. The shed is a chapel of intentions. Animals collaborate. Oxen make strength into patience. Horses make speed into sense. Cows pour summer grass into winter bowls. Pigs turn scraps into certainty. Sheep practice alchemy, rough pasture to fleece. Fleece to cloth. Cloth to warmth. Warmth to sleep. Geese are alarms and down and dinners. Chickens turn bags into eggs. Dogs are colleagues. Cats sign a contract with barns and keep it. The calendar sits lightly on all this. Regation traces field boundaries with prayer. Lammas blesses the first loaf. Michaelmas counts geese, settles accounts, and hires new hands for the year that is already thinking. Martinmas bleeds and salts and hangs, packing protein into rafters where smoke writes its long letter. Advent quiets. Candlemas promises. Light will behave more generously soon. The land keeps these feasts without needing to be told. The people keep them to stay in step. Not everything yields. There are famine years when rain behaves like an occupying army, when grain sprouts in the air, when ergot tells a darker fairy tale. In such years the village becomes a single stomach, loaves smaller, bowls more watery, patience longer, tempers shorter, sharing stubborn. The reeve forgets to collect a portion he might have insisted on last year. The Lord remembers that largesse is cheaper than revolt. The priest opens a coffer and finds enough for today. Hope is kept in jars with salt and in songs that don't lie about hunger, but also don't let it be the only language in the room. And then the cycle shows its old persistence. A lark rises, and with it, the habit of beginning again. The plough's coulter remembers how to bite. The fallow wakes. The first green shows in a line that makes even the tired lift their heads. Children, measuring seasons by chores they are finally allowed to try, stand taller by a hoe and think themselves large. Someone hums a tune that returns every March. A hand tests soil and says, with the authority only a hand has, now the year's green arithmetic is not solved. It is lived some by some, day by day, small mistakes forgiven by weather and corrected by hands. Bread emerges from these sums, ale from these rhythms, linen from these patient waters, rest from this consent to work in proportion to what the earth and bodies can manage. The field is never just a field. It is a school that refuses to close, a pantry that remembers generosity, a chapel with blackbirds for clergy and furrows for owls, a theatre where the same play is performed each year, and no one is bored because everyone is in it tonight. The gate will latch, the buyer will settle, the tools will lean with the poise of things well used, and the barns will keep their warm, grainy breath until morning. Sleep will come wearing the smell of hay and the soft ache of honest shoulders. The land will turn one small page while you rest. Tomorrow, a lark will conduct the light again. The sum continues. Time in the Middle Ages did not tick. It breathed. It moved in long, even sighs measured by bells, by shadows on stone, by candles that knew how to be patient. A day was a loop, not a ladder prime to Compline. Market hours to curfew. Sunlight to starlight, and people learn to keep their balance inside it, the way a walker learns a familiar path. If you listen at the edge of dawn, you can hear the kingdom agree once more on when to begin. It starts with a bell. Not a shriek, not a demand, just a note surprised by its own roundness. At the parish church, the rope pours weight into voice. In the monastery, the same motion is gentler, as if the bell were being woken by a friend who knows its name. Matins speaks before the sun remembers itself. Lauds adds the first pale syllable of light. In towns, the watchman hears both and nods, satisfied that the world is keeping its schedule. In villages, the dog lifts its head and then lies down again. Nothing alarming, only time becoming itself. The morning grows in measures the hand can keep. Crime folds labor into blessing. Men lift tools. Women warm ovens. Children stumble into shoes and find their way to chores by habit. Shadows lie long and honest. Their lengths are rulers for eyes that never learn numbers beyond what a field and a pantry require. A gnome on a simple stick or a wall's sharp edge draws the day into a circle of truth. Here is the line for now. Here the slow move toward noon. In a cloister, a brother has scratched the marks on a paving stone. In a manor courtyard, a steward checks the shadow and decides when to loose the plough team from harness and when to ring for bread. Noon is a soft authority. The bell for sext is not louder. It is steadier. The day stands upright. In the great houses, tables are set in light that makes beauty behave kindly. In cottages, a pot ladles out a ceremony of enough. In workshops, tools are set down so edges may cool and wrists unknot. The market takes a breath. The river becomes a mirror long enough for one person at a time. Time at noon is a guest everyone respects by speaking more quietly. After comes nones and the slow tilt of the afternoon. The sun begins its long, courteous bow. Fields abridge their sentences. Streets collect their errands and turn them into completed stories. In towns blessed with a clock, the new iron marvel behind a painted face waits sync, and gears confess the time with a bravery that still defers to the bell. People trust the bell more. The clock is clever. The bell is wise. If they disagree, a baker smiles, wipes his hands, and gives the bell the last word. Bread has its own reasons. Between the hours, other instruments mind time with the patience of furniture. Candle clocks burn not only for light, but for measure a yard of wax, caught into hours with pinholes that drop tiny balls when flame loosens. Then, water clocks in a wealthy house or cathedral chapter drape a fragile thread of time from glass to glass, bowl to bowl. A sand glass in a sheep's cabin flips with a regularity that keeps sailors honest about watches. None of these compete with bells. They simply teach the hands to be faithful when the sky is cloudy and the steeple is far. The Angelus stitches day to evening. 3 short rings, a pause. 3 more, a pause. 3 again, then a longer toll that feels like a hand smoothing linen. Work stops for a breath and a prayer, for the simple luxury of remembering that time is not a tyrant but a steward. In towns, carts pull to the side. In fields, scythes lower. In kitchens, knives rest on boards. Some lips move, some do not. The quiet is shared anyway. Larger rhythms shape the small. The week arranges itself around market and mass. The month around moon and wage. The year around seed and harvest, and the portability of light. The moon teaches night its calendar. Crescents tilt like boats. A half moon divides the month cleanly. A full moon allows travel without lanterns and makes faces in doorways recognizably kind. Tight towns keep a second calendar under the first. Their bells sometimes speak to water as much as to people. Computers, the art of finding Easter, keeps clever heads busy with golden numbers and epochs. Ordinary people are content to be told when the alleluias may rise. Saints' Day serve as landmarks that weather cannot wash away. We mended the north hedge by St. Cuthbert. Hobbes went in before St. George. The fall came the week after St. James. Even curfew cover few. Cover the fire is a kindness misremembered as command. The bell in evening reminds a town to bank cards, shutter windows, draw a cloth across flame so that houses will not argue with night. Lads hurry home, laughing. A watchman's staff taps the street with a punctuation that says sentence over, new sentence soon. Gates are swung to with a good, oiled hinge. Inside walls, lanterns behave. Outside, the road learns to be sky again. Bells themselves are a craft as careful as bread. In the foundry, copper and tin meet in a heat that makes metal remember music. Molds are built of loam and law. Names are cast into ribbed saints, donors, mottos that invite time to be used well. When a new bell is lifted to its frame oak that has already held up a century of roofs, the village gathers with a happiness that sounds like harvest. The first ring is ceremonial. A welcome to a voice that will outlast children's childhoods and a mason's knees. Later, the sexton learns the rope smooth the weight on the fall, the way damp stiffens hemp, the small delay between pull and sound. He masters patterns the town knows in its bones, steady calls for days, joyful peals for weddings, the drawn bell for death that makes conversation soften as if they were grieving too. Timekeeping is not only public, it is domestic and bodily. In kitchens, women cook by measures that never met a dial, as long as it takes to say 2 psalms, until the ladle handle grows hot, till the steam smells like bread. In fields, men cut hay with an internal metronome that leaves swath beside swath, like lines in a good book. Small children yawn by the same schedule every dusk. Cats perform the Angelus with their own ceremonies. Cows insist the evening is late. If the pail is late, the body is a clock that neither argues nor brags. In towns with universities, students live by a built-on parchment of hours. Lectures at dawn when masters believe minds are sharpest. Disputations by an afternoon light that flatters logic. Vespers that remind both master and student that cleverness is not a substitute for prayer. Scholastic time is divided finer than a farmer's time, but both end with the same curfew and the same loaf. Workshops hear time differently than fields. In the smithy, heat is the only meter that matters. Strike when the collar is that of a king's apple. Quench just as the orange retreats. Return to the coal before the metal begins to sulk. In the fulling mill, hammers keep time with water's grammar. Thought answering splash like call and response. In the weaver's shop, the shuttles run and the beater's kiss compose a song no sorter needs to copy. The watch is the night's librarian, filing hours without waking those who have lent them. He pauses at corners that fancy danger and finds only cats. He steady walks lanes that smelt of bread during the day and of good wood now. He listens to the bell, repeats it for the sake of his own spine the 3rd hour, and is grateful for roofs that keep weather from confusing. His duty, if he must rouse the town fire, date, illness, he does it with a gravity learned from bells. Never lie, never shout if a ring will do, where they revise his time without apology, and people are polite about it. A storm ray writes a morning, a frost moves today to tomorrow for plough and cart. He withdraws the afternoon as a shaded commitment to smaller tasks. Bells bend a little, the Angelus late by prudence, curfew early by caution, the market moved under a hall on posts where rain cannot find the cheese. Accuracy, in such a world, is fidelity to reality, rather than to a schedule drawn by numbers no one has met. There are days set apart by time performing kindness. On feast days, bells compete with birds and win. Hours are held open like doors. Work is put away or made playful. The space between bells is filled with procession, with bread baked in shapes for joy rather than thrift, with hours that sit down and refuse to be rushed. Even the clock grins, if you can say that of a painted face at a year's edge, when afternoon has the good manners to admit it is evening. Advent teaches patience by rationing light 1 candle, then 2, then 3, then 4 until the Christ. Mass lets the room breathe in gold. Lent measures restraint in weathers you can taste. Easter lets out time like a drawn breath. Harvest home compresses work into bells that sound full and satisfied. All Souls stretches an hour into a lantern for the dead. In every season, bells translate the sky into human. How did medieval people endure without hands full of seconds? By knowing what mattered and by measuring that. A loaf that rose when it should, a child who slept when she was ready, a scythe that cut an honest line before the dew was lost, a psalm that finished with the bell, a market that closed while kindness was still possible. These were clocks that did not need faces. When mechanical clocks arrived, they offered convenience, and the world was grateful. But the older clocks' bell, body, shadow, custom remained. The steadiest companions. Tonight, time will dim itself on purpose. Vespers will make the rafters kind. Compline will teach your breath its bedtime. Curfew will lower its careful lid on flame. A candle will count the last inch of wakefulness and then forget the number. In the tower, the bell rope will rest like a tame river. The moon will keep uncrowded watch. You will sleep without worrying whether it is 10 or 12, because time in this age does not bully. It holds, tomorrow, the same grammar. A bell that believes in morning, a shadow that trusts the sun, a market that trusts the bell, a loaf that trusts the oven, a field that trusts the hand, a heart that trusts that hours are not enemies but rooms. With chairs, step into them quietly. Sit. Listen for the note that says begin again. Peace in the Middle Ages was not an accident. It was made patiently, publicly, and often by neighbors who knew each other's dogs and door latches, by stewards who remembered last year's harvest and next year's roofs, by bells that gathered people under a tree or into a hall to speak their minds without raising their voices. The law most people met was not a royal thunderbolt, but a steady habit. Measure, listen, swear, amend, forgive, then go home in time to bank the fire. Morning finds the manor court assembling under a wide-limbed tree or inside a timbered hall where rushes sweeten the floor. Benches scrape, caps are tipped, and the steward, keeping order on the Lord's behalf, sets a small table with ink, a tally stick, and a list that is less a threat than a memory. The reeve stands nearby, practical as a hinge. He knows who borrowed whose ox, which fence forgot its manners, where a ditch needs reminding of its duty. 12 good men of the Ville juries, growing out of habit into office, sit with faces that look like fields, weathered, fair when treated fairly. Cases are ordinary and therefore important. A boundary walked wrong by a few furrows, a pig that discovered an education in turnips and must be retrained, a path pinched by a new shed, a promise to fix a stile before Michaelmas that was nearly kept. Voices are careful. Everyone knows the way sound carries. Witnesses speak. Neighbors nod when truth comes out to stretch its legs. Oaths are sworn with hands on a gospel or a relic, oaths that do not shout, only lean their weight on a sentence until it stands upright. Compligators, folk who vouch for a person's word, do their quiet work, not magic, only community declaring what it has learned by living together. The court's punishments are mostly amusements, fine size to the purse and the fault. The word itself remembers mercy. A fence that should be mended is fined lightly and then mended. A ditch that pretended it couldn't hold water is given both a rebuke and a shovel. A quarrel is assigned a piece to keep. On the steward's table, the tally stick notches the sum. Halves will be split debtor and court, so that later, when the pieces are matched, truth obliges itself to fit down in town, the borough court. Minds, markets, and manners. Here, the assize of bread and ale is an ordinary liturgy. A standard bushel hung in the church porch, so no one can pretend it changed shape in a back room, teaches sacks to be honest. Loaves are weighed. If a baker has underpaid the parish in crumb, he pays in coin and dignity and returns to the oven a wiser man. The ale taster or ale conner does his cheerful duty, sampling a fresh brew, sometimes by soaking a stool or leather breeches and sitting to test stickiness, a small theatre for a serious aim. The drink be sound and measures fair. No one is ruined. Someone is corrected. The street takes a breath of relief. Frankfledge holds villages together like a net with large friendly knots, tithing small groups of households, promising to produce any member who needs producing, to answer for small harms before they become large ones, to stand as a chorus for the notion that belonging is not only privilege but promise. If a chicken becomes an invitation to temptation or a fence forgets its edge, a tithing feels the tug and answers. The effect is not surveillance, but companionship with responsibility. When royal justices ride the circuit with their parchment saddlebags and travelling ink, the mood is more formal, but still readable. Pleas of the crown and weighty matters rise to their benches. For most, the visiting court is a spectacle. Seals pressed into wax with a smell like bees in summer. Writs unrolled with a whisper of vellum. A clerk's Latin serving as a polite fence between passions and decisions. A ville's business fields. Fences, small feud stays where it belongs, tuned by custom and the people who must live with it tomorrow. The church courts, gentler in writ, broader in reach, tend the garden of words and promises, marriage and its tangles, wills and their fairness, slander and its repairs. Penance is sized to the harm and the heart. A whispered mischief earns a whispered remedy. A louder wrong gets a public cure. The goal is not humiliation, it is mending. A candle given, a pilgrimage promised, an apology folded into a feast day. Sanctuary, where it survives, is not a loophole so much as a pause, but in time enough for tempers to settle and for the next step to be chosen with a clearer head. Weights and measures live where people can see them. Iron ale once for cloth. In the draper's hall, the town pound for cheese and meat, the guilds test stone for silver. The idea is simple and revolutionary. Let the standard be public so trust can be private. A boy pressed into service on market day learns, by carrying the bushel back to its peg, that fairness is not a sermon, it is an object. Knights have their guardians. The watch walks with a lantern and a staff, not to terrify but to tame panic. Watch and ward is a rhythm. Towns take turns. Gates learn their bedtime. If trouble lifts its head, the hue and cry is raised, neighbors shouting not rage but agenda. To the gate, to the lane, lend your hands. Then quiet returns. because quiet is the natural state of streets that trust themselves, disputes that begin as property often end as proverbs. A hedge cut too far becomes a saying against haste. A boundary blunder begets a procession at rogation tide, beating the bounds kindly so that children learn the limits with their feet and bells lend memory a tune. Customs copper hold rights, cleaning after harvest. Common pasture dates are not only clauses in a cartulary, they are the town's manners, repeated until no one needs to look them up. Documents keep their own peace. A charter in crisp letters flourish sleeps in a chest with 3 locks, 1 key for the priest, 1 for the reeve, 1 for the most stubbornly honest man in the ville. Seals hang like small moons on green or red cords. When they break and are remade, it is done with a pause that everyone feels in the room. Paper is rare, parchment is precious, memory is the longest ledger. Old women know who promised what by a saint's day 15 years ago. Old men know where an ash stood before last winter's wind taught it humility. Sometimes the law asks for oaths more than coins. 2 neighbors, hot and then cooled, swear to keep the peace till the next feast, and then keep it longer because it's easier. A boy who threw a stone that found the wrong window makes amends not only in a small sum, but in a larger habit. Wood stacked in winter, the message carried in rain. The court smiles without grinning. That is the point. The goal is not victory, it is continuance. None of this is spotless. There are years when fines feel heavy and mercy shy. Stewards who love forms more than fairness. Lords who remember their rights more vividly than their duties. But over decades, the ordinary grammar of justice makes a town recognizable as itself. It is a grammar with only a few rules, learned by use. Show up, speak plain, swear carefully, pay what steadies, repair what you can reach. Let tomorrow be easier than yesterday. When the session ends, people stand, stretch, and rejoin the day. A boy runs an errand that was promised while his father was listening. A woman adjusts her basket and shares a proverb that reduces a quarrel to a shrug. The steward sands the last wet ink, blows gently, and closes the book. The tree keeps its shade. The hall returns to being a place where winter stories sound better. The village, having told the truth to itself, goes back to its chores with a lighter back. What keeps peace is not a single sword or a single parchment. It is custom that knows how to bow without breaking, courtesy that treats opponents as future neighbors because they are, clarity in measures and words, and care for the poor that makes envy less necessary. It is the bell that summons without frightening, the seal that proves without shouting, the oath that invites people to remember what they want to be when the day is over and the lamp is low. Tonight, the same stars will rise over roofs that trust their latches. Somewhere a tally stick will sleep in a chest, halves waiting to agree. Somewhere else, a standard bushel will hang in a porch like a small moon, promising tomorrow's fairness. The watch will pass, and his lantern will make puddles of light that feel like sentences finishing with quiet periods. Sleep will come easily to a town that has listened to itself and kept its word. A forest at daybreak does not announce itself. It resumes. Dew beads along hazel leaves. A thrush tests 3 notes and keeps the second. Light arrives in strands, not sheets, touching bark. Then fern, then the old path where feet have taught the earth to think in curves. If the Middle Ages had a spare room where the kingdom kept its calm, it was here, in coppice thickets and tall beech aisles, in oak with shoulders broad enough for centuries, in places where work moved at the speed of sap, paths know their errands. One leads to a charcoal clamp on orderly hill of stacked wood under turf, breathing faint smoke with the patience of bread rising. Another breaks into a glade where pigs nose among beech mast and acorns, the swineherd leaning on a stick and listening to the herd's small music. A third, narrower, finds a stream that scours its stones clean and offers a place to drink without getting boots argumentative. Above it all, oaks, beeches, birches. Under them, holly, hazel, bramble. Beneath those, the quiet arithmetic of moss and mushroom. Right stitch people to these trees with old, tidy words. Pannage brings pigs each. Autumn to feed on mast and fatten into winter's confidence. Istava allows deadwood for fires and small timber for repairs. Houseboat and fireboat are taken in measures the forest recognizes. Not greed, but need. Turbary where the ground permits cuts peat from the bug's patient ledger. A woodward or forester walks and makes sure the grammar holds. Trims excess. Warns against waste. Nods at those who gather with manners. The forest is not a hoard. It is a pantry that insists on receipts written in restraint. Copy stands are the forest's careful bargains. Hazel stalks cut down on purpose reject despair and send up shoots in rings, straight and kind. Every 7th year or thereabout, men with bills cut bind stack. Poles become hurdles, hoops, thatch pegs, broom handles, ribs for baskets. The coppice and standards plan leaves high trees oaks with serious ambitions rising above the quick, renewing growth. Birds learn to skies, one of leaves and one of trunks. Light is measured and spent like coin deeper in. Charcoal burners live in a settlement that packs up and walks 3 times a year. Their huts are round, low, and provisional. Their days are longer than clocks. They stack billets in a careful cone, cover with turf, prick vents with memory. Then the watching begins. Slow fire alive but not hungry. Smoke tells the story in shades a town would miss. Too pale starved, too thick greedy. Just right a blue that says tomorrow will have iron worthy of tempering. A clamp that behaves makes tools that behave. The forest understands this chain of courtesy. 80 clearings. Edge. A saw pit opens the ground into usefulness. A trunk is rolled across. Wedges bite. The top sawyer walks the plank and draws the long saw. The pitman below answers, sawdust falling like warm straw. Planks are borne in measured strokes. Boards for bridges, timbers for frames, pews for churches, lids for chests that will keep linen polite. The work is steady, the talk sparse and friendly, the smell resin bright. On certain days, the carter comes, hums to the horses, and the forest lends its weight to a road that knows how to hold it. Forests keep honey in several shapes. In the open, skeps hum. In the deep, bee trees hide their amber between old lightning scars. A bee-man listens with his wrist, learns the weather from a tune, smokes a hive with patience, takes only what winter can spare, leaves enough sweetness for bees to worship their queen without worry. Wax goes to candles and to letters. Honey goes to bread and to throats that sang too long at last market. Both go to feasts where light and taste are permitted to be a little more than enough. Wild game exists, but in the quiet story it exists mostly as movement and sign. A slot of deer in soft ground, a boar's rake in leaf litter, a pheasant's nervous tilt. Forest law where it is strict names vert and venison, protecting green and beast alike for lords and kings. Even there, the underforest thrives with other work. Bark peeled from oak props up the tanner's ear. Ash becomes handles that sit cleanly in the palm. Willow remembers baskets into shape. Yew rarely, reverently finds itself in long boughs that bend the air's opinion. Most days, the only thing hunted is kindling, and it's pursued with baskets and a gentle eye. There are hermits, 2 men and sometimes women whose houses are the size of a corrected thought and whose gardens can be weeded in an hour. They keep a spring clean, tend a wayside chapel where candles learn humility, show travellers where a ford behaves. Their prayers do not shout. They sit like moss on stone, making everything around them kinder by existing. A pilgrim who stops here leaves lighter, not because the road has shortened, but because the journey remembered it is allowed to be peaceful. In May, the forest wears procession like a garland. Villagers walk under boughs, sing the note that says rogation, take boundary into memory by touching it with their hands. Children are lifted to see where parish ends and deer park begins, where a lord's pale fence speaks of venison and a poor man's rights speak of fuel. Someone tears a rag on a hawthorn near a spring and asks quietly for a small mercy. The forest keeps such secrets without effort, even in winter. When frost spells its alphabet across every twig, the forest is not empty. Pollards trees beheaded, young and educated into lowering their branches of a firewood at a height goats and cows can't rewrite. Trails narrow into white corridors. Holly holds its color like a conviction. A robin makes a single precise red in a black and silver world. A woodcutter stacks cordwood with corners a mason would respect. A woman gathers brash for kindling and carries it home balanced like a crown. Pigs finished with mast are walked out with bellies understanding contentment. Smoke lifts from clamps slower under wet air. The quiet is not silence. It is the sound of waiting done well. Rain revises plans. Paths go from useful to honest and tell you where not to step. The charcoal burner shortens a vent and smiles. The swineherd walks a different loop and returns just as certain. The sawyers call it early, because a log lying in rain learns to be twice its weight. In a light hour, mushrooms appear chanterelles like small trumpets, hedgehogs with friendly spines, oysters growing like shells in a scholar's dream. People take only what supper and sense require. A proverb is repeated. Leave some for the forest's own appetite. Birds own the canopy with an authority no charter can grant. In spring, nightingales pour patience into evening. In summer, blackbirds stitch morning together. In autumn, Jays bury acorns and plant trees without permission. In winter, woodpeckers knock on old trunks with a craftsman's persistence. Children learn their names by the way adults greet them under breath. Robin, wren, thrush. A boy finds a fallen feather and becomes rich for an afternoon. The forest meets the parish in small, daily treaties. A hurdle gate is lifted and remembered. A path is kept passable by feet that do not have to be told twice. A fallen tree is cut where it lies and stacked where carts can reach. Bridleways are not blocked because tomorrow someone will need to pass with a load of hay that keeps a cow from complaining. Disputes about a hedge that wandered or a ditch that forgot go to the manor court under the same tree that lent shade last summer. The steward hears. The reeve nods. The forest listens and does not object when the fence is moved back to where the parish remembers it should be dotted tonight. The trees become taller without moving. Wind reads itself out loud across the canopy. A stream rehearses. Owls take their posts. A forester makes a final round. His dog keeps a pace half a step behind, satisfied with decisions taken in daylight. The charcoal clamp smokes like a patient animal sleeping. The sawpit is a dark mouth that will speak sawdust again at dawn. The pigs mumble companionably in the pen. The hermit's lamp draws a small circle on a page of bark where he copies a verse to be learned by heart. If a deer passes, it is a rumor more than a sight. The forest closes its eyes gently and trusts frost to be polite. What does the forest give besides wood? Scale, to make a person feel pleasantly smaller. Steadiness, to make work feel part of something that doesn't panic. Materials that are merciful when handled with respect. Wood that forgives. Bark that serves. Leaf that teaches patience by turning when it is time and not before. Habits that keep a community from quarreling with its pantry. Take what falls. Cut what grows to be cut. Leave what needs another year. Thank without speeches. In the morning. Mist will thread the lower branches. Spider webs will become cartography. Hoof and boot will write in damp and then be edited by sun. The swineherd will count pigs by sound and be right. The charcoal burner will open the clamp and see black that is not ash but future heat. The sawyers will push and pull until a board tells them it is ready. The bee-man will lift a skep and feel weight that argues for winter's calm. The hermit will sweep a little porch and give the day back to the road with a blessing that feels like cool water. You can sleep now in a house that owes its roof to these trees. The wind outside is not a threat. It is a choir practicing scales. The log in your hearth was once a line in a green book. It is now a paragraph of warmth. Somewhere in the forest a twig falls and nobody minds. Morning knows the way through the leaves. If you pressed your ear to a medieval day and listened without hurrying, you would find that it was musical long before any instrument was tuned. The mill kept a low drone. The loom added a shuttle's rhythm. A street cry rose and fell with a tune it had learned from selling onions. A mother's voice smoothed the edge of evening with a lullaby used by her grandmother and by someone she never met. The Middle Ages carried its music without spectacle, hands at work, feet in time, voices doing what voices like to do. The earliest song is breath making friends with words. In a chapel at dawn, the chant begins as if it were already in the room, waiting to be noticed. Latin syllables go by in long, patient lines, no drum, no flourish, only a melody that remembers how to step gently. The modes Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian are old paths, and the brothers who walk them do not count notes. They count silences. The page shows neumes, small marks that do not command so much as suggest the shape of the air. A single voice becomes several when a second line is added far above or far below, organ blooming like a new color that the church windows already knew. Outside, song grows practical. In a field, scythes swing with a pace that invites a refrain. Someone offers 2 lines good enough to keep the swathes even. In the dye lane, apprentices make the rinsing go faster by agreeing on a round. I go, you go, he goes, and the day becomes shorter by agreeing to share it. Work songs are not poetry and do not apologize for it. Their job is to keep risks honest and quarrels shy. Even a cart's wheels on cobbles make a kind of measure. The driver clucks the horses into a tempo that makes turning easier on the bridge. At market, music wears shoes. A pipe and taper play a flute in one hand. Small drum at his elbow teaches the square to walk in circles. The carol or carol is a ring dance, palms linked. Steps simple enough to learn by accident. Children learn first, then tug adults into laughter. A fiddler field joins, his bow singing in honeyed vowels. A rebec answers in a thinner, cheerier voice. A boy mouths the melody and looks for someone to pretend to be a drum. He discovers the art of rhythm on a bench with his palms and is congratulated by strangers. The bagpipe arrives and the tune becomes a small procession. It is not refined. It is irresistible. In towns, minstrels keep streets and halls well fed with stories. A harp small enough to carry, strong enough to make pewter listen, finds a corner in a tavern, and a voice begins the tale of a knight who learned mercy and therefore survived. A hurdy-gurdy organistrum's nimble descendant sets a wheel, humming under a tune like a candle flame that refuses to be bullied by a draught. A psaltery becomes a table of light under fingers that know where brightness lives. People who cannot sing anyway. Refrains teach them how. When the story becomes a lay or ballad, the room breathes in time, where the tale requires laughter. The audience arrives early, music listens to seasons. May brings songs that sound like green things. Harvest has verses that lift sheaves without complaint. Winter folds voices inwards and lets them sit nearer the fire. Carols at Christ Mass are less performance than participation. A will of simple tunes played on whatever is willing: fiddle, flute, drum. A child's hands on the table while the hearth remembers last year's ash. In the spring, a Maying chorus walks the hedge and teaches the buds their names. In summer, evening catches a round that stays caught down the lane and back to the square, where it finds itself again as if it had never left. Not all music is for dancing and feasts. Some belongs to the small rooms of sorrow and repair. A keening for a quiet funeral makes the street soften its steps. A lullaby shows a fretful baby how to be persuaded without being defeated. Its words promise sheep and stars and little boats that always dock. A love song sung in a courtyard is careful not to wake anyone who would misunderstand it. The tune hangs in the air like a golden thread until morning. A prayer to a local saint finds a melody that suits the parish's accent. Half the congregation sings, and the other half prays by listening. Instruments carry biographies. A veil shows on its back where a strap wore a groove over years of fares. A harp bears little nail marks that speak of a player who practiced late while others slept. A portative organ at the church pipes like a crate of silver quills wheezes amiably as the bellows are pumped, and the melody lines the nave with a second roof. A shawm and a sackbut will arrive later at city feasts to make banners feel braver. But on ordinary evenings, the town prefers gentler voices, whistle, drum, voice, and the sound a table makes when you pat it in gratitude. Notation travels slowly among those who need it. A cantor in a cathedral leads, and boys follow in lines that make memory proud. In a monastery, a gradual lies open on a lectern large enough to be seen by more than one set of eyes, and the choir turns a page at the same breath. In parishes, songs are learned by hearing, the way a road is learned by walking. Paper is rare, parchment is dear, and so music trusts ears and tongues, which do not wear out if exercised kindly. A village with one tuneful family can keep a dozen good songs alive for 50 years without remembering where they started. Story walks with song like a companion who carries bread. Saints' lives give courage shape. Bread and LA eyes lend wonder formal manners. Fabliers spare no vanity, and therefore teach as hard as sermons. Riddles sharpen patience and make children and elders equally pleased to be clever. Proverbs hitch a proverb to a little melody, so it will not be lost in a thin year. A traveller returning from towns with many bells brings home a line about Roland or Arthur. By winter, the line has become a story with a local stream and a local tree. By spring, it is ours, and can be set to the village's preferred tune. Guilds sing their competence. The weavers have a chant that counts warp and weft. The bakers keep a kneading song whose tempo makes dough honest. The carpenters know a stave-raising shout that brings a beam home square. The ferrymen answer river with call and response heard most clearly at dusk. A guild feast includes a polite amount of boasting in verse, the chorus insisting on accuracy. The ale measured, the cloth full, the beam true, the coin fair. If the ale taster is present, he is given a stanza and a smile. Some towns keep a mystery play cycle that holds the Bible up to laughter and tears and finds neither embarrassed. Each craft has its pageant wag in heaven, a gilded canopy. Hell a dragon mouth with cloth fire pulled by a rope that squeaks in a famous way. Between wagons, minstrels stitch scenes together. Between scenes, a piper reminds the crowd to breathe. Above the crowd, doves released by a chapman who sells ribbons decide to stay a while and become part of the plot. The refrain everyone knows now. Let us sing and make good cheer does not argue with theology. It invites it to supper. Music also keeps time. When the angelus rings, knives stop and voices kneel. When curfew speaks, fiddles yawn, and the last tune leans toward the door. Bells are the largest instruments, tuned to a town's idea of itself. But under the bell, smaller instruments keep the hours gentle. The spoon against a pan when a child wanders too close to the hearth. The rake rhythm as hay goes down. The thump of a churn that promises butter soon on the coast, where harbors own 2 clocks, wind and tide music, and work are braided into a rope that doesn't slip. Net mending has a rhythm. Capstone songs hoist anchors and spirits with equal practicality. Fishwives' cries selling catch our music with a price. Inland, shepherds' pipes make hills courteous. Goatherds play tunes that scatter and then gather their flocks. No one writes these down. The hillside remembers them. That is enough. Night softens everything. In a cottage, a child asks for the star song and gets it. A tune that points out 3 bright friends and teaches their names: Orion's belt, the Pleiades, the kind northern lamp. In a town, a watch calls the hour, with a phrase that lands like a blanket. Past 10, and all is well. At a monastery, Compline completes the day's long cadence. The final antiphon sits like a cup of warm milk in the stomach of the house. In a castle hall, a harper plays low so that those who must stay awake at the gate feel included, though they cannot hear every note. In every place, the fire keeps slow time, a metronome made of light. What did music mean then? That memory travels, best when sung. That work is lighter when someone proposes a melody for it. That a story is truer when the room breathes together. That holiness can be carried on breath and leave the mouth without leaving the heart. That love likes a tune you can hum on a lane in ordinary shoes. That children grow taller inside psalms they can finish by themselves. Tomorrow, the same soft orchestras will reconvene. The loom will find its rhythm. The bell will offer its old note. The market will discover the exact tempo of bargaining. The fields will answer with a scythe song older than jokes. The church will measure dawn with a line of kindness. A traveler will arrive with a new refrain, and by evening, it will belong to the town. You can sleep now under a roof that knows how to listen. The night will keep your place in the chorus.